I didn't either.
Luke's been sick, so that's what he said.
How's it being fired? Do we have to adjourn? Okay, I got it. What's today's date? Uh-oh, are we streaming?
Yes, we are.
It's recorded, I don't know what day it is. Okay, I will call the Special Board of Selectmen's meeting, November 8th, 2018 to order at 7 o'clock. Can we have the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, this special meeting is to discuss with Bob Holdsworth and Len Gershon and to get some information for the Board of Selectmen about EMS and the service, because it is a very, very complicated service. So we will be running this under Robert's rules, be recognized by the chair, brought up, and I will recognize the people who want to ask questions or whatever of the person. So where do we begin? You are?
Bob Holdsworth.
Hello, Bob Holdsworth. Nice to meet you.
How are you? Nice to meet you.
Would you like me to introduce everyone, Jeffrey?
Okay. Len Gershon.
Hello, sir.
Nice to meet. I've met you. And who else is here?
Raphael Kohler from the Department of Public Health.
Our Raphael
OEMS.
and Jean. We have met, but something's changed. Okay. Okay. So, do we want to start with Bob Holdsworth? Do you have any?
Well, do our guests have any opening remarks? Or?
Opening remarks?
I do.
Bob, come on up.
Don't worry. Good evening.
Good evening.
How's everybody?
Good, Bob.
So, the opening remark basically is this. I was asked to come tonight to answer questions that you may have about the report that we did in 2013. So I will have to keep my remarks to that report. So I'm not familiar with what is going on, what has changed in almost 6 years. This report will be, in 90 days, will be almost 6 years old from the time we started the project. It was issued in May, but we started it in February of 2013. By background, our firm, the Holdsworth Group, was doing the billing for Heritage Village and Southbury Ambulance from the 90s through until I sold the company in 2017. Len Gershon was a partner in the firm at the time that this report was done. Because I had done a report in 2010 related to the paramedic provision of service, and because of the involvement in the billing piece, when this project came to be, I asked Len to take point on the report, which is why he's sitting next to me, because he was the primary author of the report. Because I wanted a fresh set of eyes on the system, because I had been involved with the system for a number of years, and the people involved in the system as well. So I am familiar with what's in the report. I did assist with the projection and the financial projections that are in the report. I did proof the report, and I did work with Len after he had done all of the data collection and the interviews. So that is my involvement in that. I don't know what questions you have, so I don't know what we should have prepared to answer for you. I don't know if it's historical about what was going on in the town at the time or anything else. So I'm here to answer your questions, prefaced by that.
So I think something I would like to know, was wondering is, the Holdsworth report, they're saying that there was data missing, there was misinformation. It was never, my understanding, was it ever completed, and what was it gonna take? Why, do you have any idea why it wasn't?
Specifically, what are you speaking about? Where in the report are you speaking about data?
It was never accepted.
It was
but-
issued as a draft. A lot of times reports get issued to municipalities as drafts and they never get accepted.
And do you know what the issue was?
I do not.
Okay. So it just was not accepted.
It is extremely common for municipalities to do one of two things. Either accept a report in draft form and it never gets approved into a final form if there's no action to be taken on it. And this was designed as an informational report for the town manager and the board of selectmen. It is also relatively common for reports from the consultant in these types of issues to be issued through the town attorney, because a lot of times there are things that might be found that may wish to be attorney-client privilege. So those things both happened. In this case, it was accepted as a draft, and that's where it stayed.
So it's not unusual for this work to be done
I just issued
through-
one to another community and issued it to their attorney, and their attorney is
So that-
maintaining it.
That's a common,
It is very common.
so, and I think that's what we had worked on. Your, you sold your business in 2017.
I sold the billing business, billing
To who?
division. I sold the billing component to a company in Pittsburgh called Quick Med Claims.
And who owns that? you know?
There's a number of, it's owned by a venture
Is
capital firm.
Fitch part of that?
Fitch? No.
No.
Fitch is a competing consulting company.
All right.
The Holdsworth Group and the Fitch and Associates are the only two EMS consulting firms in the country that have been around more than 30 years.
Okay. Currently, the town is analyzing our EMS system on many fronts for many different reasons, with reports from your firm that are 5 to 8 years old. How often do you feel that these analyses should be conducted? Is there a time period that you feel appropriate?
We've had reports that have been redone multiple times. We've had reports that have never been done.
So there's
They've-
not
they've
like
never
what you
been-
think
they've never
over
been
so
updated.
many?
Nope.
Okay, okay.
Nope.
All
It's a matter of what is going on in the community, and what the needs of that community might be. What there were in 2010 was a discussion of paramedic service in town. What the premise, as I understood it when we were issued the project in 2013, was that the then mayor and council wanted an assessment of the system with the 3 services that were there.
Okay.
Specifically, within, and I don't have the date off the top of my head, but within a 6-month period prior to engaging in this report, Southbury Training School had turned over dispatching responsibility and alarm responsibilities to the town on relatively short notice. And the first selectman was concerned what would happen if the ambulance and the fire department were turned over on relatively short notice, which led to the broader discussion of, if I'm gonna be responsible for EMS in the town, what exactly is there? What would the viability of all of the agencies be? What would happen if one of them failed? And then looking for economies that could be brought to bear, if those were, if those existed. That was the premise and the charge.
Okay. In 2010, your final recommendations included to either A, renegotiate with the current provider, or B, put out an RFP for paramedic service. Based on what you know of the current system in place, which have not significantly changed except for the pending closure of the SDS EMS system, are these prioritized options still would be your first choice?
There's really only 4 potential options that would exist. One would be your existing provider, would be an RFP to see what's out there. In this case, you have providers that, my understanding, and again, I'm not gonna address current issues, as I'm
That's fine.
not up to par on them. But there are agencies here in town that have an interest in upgrading, which is an option. And then there is crafting or consolidating services and providing it that way. Starting from scratch would make no sense. And I don't even have to look at numbers to tell you that. You know,
Okay.
you have too many resources in the community already.
Too many?
You know, that you would not want to reconstitute and add more layers of
You
resources.
would not want to add more layers to the current
In other
system.
words, you have 3 services in town, and I assume so, I don't know
Yep.
what's going on with Sudbury. And you have Campions to go out and say, start a service, and then have a 5th, would make no sense. That's my point.
Or another layer.
Not that you have too much.
Or an additional layer.
Correct.
And in your 2010 report, and option 2, which was to upgrade an existing BLS provider, was premised on the best system delivered, is the intercept model, and to do so for the entire town. Currently, we have in front of us a model that would primarily serve, we're here tonight, of an upgrade of just one of the PSAs, and would do so with a transport paramedic. Is this the most cost-efficient, in your opinion, most cost-efficient model for the entire town?
I can't address what the economics are right now within the community, or nor the call volumes, nor the time of day, or any of that.
Okay.
So I can't answer that question accurately. You currently have an intercept paramedic.
Correct.
Which is through Campions. Adding a resource into the system, I would think would not be a bad thing, but I can't address that. But if you went from 1 paramedic to 2, arguably, if that didn't cost you much, that would be a good thing.
Anybody else have any questions of Bob? I'll recognize you. George?
What's the advantage, if there is one, of having, I guess it's called an embedded paramedic in town versus the fly car paramedic? Is there an advantage, or does it really not matter?
That I can't address. The reason that the paramedic system was designed the way it was in 2010 is because you had 3 BLS transportation services, but you needed paramedics to reach them when it was needed. So you need an ambulance to transport the patient 100% of the time. Statistically, the paramedic responds to, in an intercept model, they're probably responding to 60 or 65% of the calls, providing service to probably 35 or 40% of those patients who truly need it. So the concept of an embedded, or as you say, dedicated, an ALS ambulance, sometimes makes sense, sometimes not, depending upon how it's going to be deployed and depending upon what the call volume is. And again, going back 6 years, I don't know what the ALS usage in town is right now. So it often makes sense to have a paramedic available that can go to a call, realize it's not as serious as it was originally indicated by dispatch, remain in town available while the patient is transported. So for example, you have a patient that has possible cardiac event and it turns out not to be cardiac related. Paramedic goes to that call, realizes it is not a cardiac event, the medic is not available. The ambulance transports that patient, the medic is still in town. You've built some redundancy and availability in your system.
Well, it sounds like having an embedded paramedic is an advantage over straight fly car.
I want to make sure we're talking the same language of embedded. Do you mean dedicated to the community?
Well,
Or
Are you talking about they're here in the community?
yeah,
that's dedicated?
that's what I'm,
Yeah.
I don't, maybe don't have the right terminology, but that's been discussed many times. And we'd like to have one.
Mhm.
Wondering if it makes sense.
Unless something has changed, and I don't know whether it has or has not, you have been able to get a paramedic when you've needed one in the community, this going back to 2010. The people in the room that are living this in the system and operating the system day to day can address whether or not that is becoming an issue of availability or not. But again, availability of 1, availability of 2, if you have that option, that's a better option.
Would you say that that could be addressed by looking at the call volume of the calls of ALS, say from the time of this, I think it was a 2013, till now, if that has been a large volume of change in call volume of ALS, that would show whether,
Again, I don't want to get into, an analysis of what we're doing, but if you need to look at, anybody, you're looking at services, you want to see what's being used, how it's being used, are there response issues in getting availability of resources at any level, and then going from there.
Jennifer?
Nice to see you.
Hi,
Thank you
good
for
to see you
coming.
again.
In 2010, times were different. And it's fair to say our population has grown a little bit. Maybe the number's not as much as I would have thought, based on what you calculated. But maybe the model for providing the service has changed somewhat. So can you speak to what other towns have done? Do those that did paramedic intercept back in 2010, have they changed their model? And this is general, not
Yeah.
looking for any specific.
I can't say that I've seen a dramatic shift. I've put together multiple systems within this state and other states that are predicated on the intercept type model, and I don't go into it saying, this is my model and we make the system fit. However, it has proven to be a valuable way to deliver that level of care cost effectively in many, many parts of the country, many parts of the state. You have, assuming the system has not changed much since we last looked at it, I last looked at it, you have availability of getting a paramedic into your community where others who are part of regional programs may not necessarily have the resource as readily available, because typically one community has a higher volume than another. You have decided, as others have, that we are willing as a community to pay a certain amount of money to make sure that a paramedic comes. So I don't know enough to say that I would change that model. And again, that goes back to service delivery and available resources, which the people behind me know inside and out as to whether they're having that problem.
Right. I think what's come to this table is that there hasn't been an issue of the service that's been provided. What happened was, just a little background history, the state was shutting down its operations, which you even identified as a possibility, or which was identified in 2010.
Yeah, we talked about it.
And it's been talked about for decades before that, I'm sure.
Yep.
So, not speaking to their service, because their level of service has been wonderful as far as I personally am concerned. But one thing that was identified as a possibility for operation is a merging of the groups and pursuing the ability to do the paramedic themselves, which is starting to be a model that SAA is starting to pursue by putting in their application. What I was concerned about was we were getting approached, we were putting in for the ability to own a PSA for services that we currently don't provide except through the Intercept program. So I said, we all said, most of us said, that we wanted to understand, well, if we did that, what would the cost be? What is the obligation of the town to do that? Both of your reports say that we could do nothing. We don't have to provide this service, not a recommendation, but
Correct.
it's an option, right, to not provide it. So that was something that we could have pursued, but of course, public safety is number one from our perspective, I believe. But we had a lot of information coming at us, and we were, I won't speak for you guys, but overwhelmed. It is a very convoluted system in which you are involved, so all of you. And I guess it's not meant for the average person to understand it, just to know that when they pick up that phone, somebody's gonna be there.
That's exactly what it's designed to do.
And that's what's worked well in our town. But it behooves us as a board to pursue what we should be doing for the general population at large, given the day and time that we live in. So, that wasn't your charge to come back with that information or recommendation, because we haven't hired you for an analysis to do that. But what we have been asking for is an analysis of what we as a town are responsible to give and what are our options. You've given us options in both of these reports. Some of them have financial component. I think the most recent one has actually a little bit more financial. I wanted to ask you about that, actually. In the 2013 one, there are numbers, and it's an appendix, and it says it's, is that just potential scenarios, or is, that's what it was. So if we were to say we're gonna get in the ambulance business as a town, I think the number was like 2.1 million.
The issue is, and I.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over that.
No, it's okay. It's okay, because they're kind of together. The report was issued in response to what are the scenarios of things we could do? From leave it alone, which it's working.
Right.
Be prepared for contingencies such as the training school closing and having to pick up some call volume. To what happens if one of the ambulance services were to fail and you had to pick up more call volume. Down the road, would we want to run our own paramedic in town, or is contracting still a good option? So all of those scenarios were put on the table, and if you looked at the option of consolidation of services, I believe at the last line on that, at the bottom of that page, is given the regulations and everything at the time, that would be an option should all parties agree. So we put it on the table as something for the agencies to discuss, but there is no mandate, or stick to make that happen. And again, if the service delivery is in fact as good as it was before, then the only issue is if there's an issue with Southbury Training School, and again, I don't know the details of anything of that, but if that is the case, then it's just a matter of where does that call volume go and who picks that up. So going into the ambulance business, as you said, we did a budget for what a consolidated entity would be, or it could be what is a separate and distinct town entity if everybody were to close their doors and go away.
So this page, this one.
That's the
was
starting point, yes.
So that's numbers we could work off of, should we as a town want to get into the ambulance business. We were trying to get our heads around that.
And that was based on, again, needs assessment done then, call volume done then, and as a bare bones service. So if you look at that, that is providing one ambulance 24 hours a day, a second ambulance 14 hours a day, and a paramedic in a fly car 24 hours a day. That is less service than you have now. But that was, and the point of that was the illustration, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yes, sir.
the point of that was to illustrate that you could do it, but the service delivery issues that you might have, it actually would cost you more than this. But that is the bare minimum that you could get by with, given
Is
the call
is that
volume.
the expense side, not the, but that doesn't take into consideration the income side?
The page prior to that, page 41 of the report shows some revenue. And that, again, was predicated on data and volume and numbers and rates at the time. So you were looking at a bare minimum ambulance service at 1.9 and revenue approximate of 1.7. You were still paying $250,000 and being in the ambulance business rather than shifting liability to a vendor.
But
which-
what you're saying, so I just want to, that's what I'm trying to get a clear, what I'm getting at here is, because we just said that so I'm looking at Bear is 1.9,
Was.
revenues of 1 point, back then.
Right.
Was.
So it's $200,000, just roughly back then. I get it.
The point of that was showing you, taking this, if you consolidated services and went into, the bare minimum delivery, which was the discussion point that we had, as memory recalls, what could we do, what could we get by with, was, I believe, the way it was phrased. And that was one ambulance 24 hours a day, the paramedic fly car that you have now, and an ambulance during peak times, which was, we set up as 14 hours a day. The point of the exercise was, it's gonna cost you minimally $1.9 million. You can probably bring in 1.7. You're gonna end up paying $250,000 to make it whole, and you're only, at that point in time, you were only paying $250,000 to have a paramedic service, of which part of that was subsidized by revenue coming from the ambulance providers. So it really wasn't even costing the town that whole amount, which I think is still the case.
And we'd be delivering
Just about.
and we'd be delivering a lower level of
service.
Well, there'd be a lower,
Right.
lower availability of
Lower
resources.
availability of resources, that's right.
So that was if you were gonna put everybody together, you could do it, but the caveat is, you have to really think this through, because right now you have good service, or at that point, and I'm assuming it's still the case, you had great service, and you're not saving anything. As a matter of fact, you're taking on more liability. So probably not the choice, but our charge was, show us what it would look like, not recommended as a course of action.
Of course, right now, there's 3 services, 3 levels, and it would have to be analyzed.
We have 2 levels, I think, right?
Well, 3 ambulance services.
Correct.
In town. Is there any other questions?
I just had a question about that point, and that's the provision of services. I read reread the 2010, the 2013 report, and as I read them, the 2010 report seemed to say, things are going well, you guys have a good system, here's a couple of things you could do to potentially improve it. You could go renegotiate with Campion, you talked about peak hours and perhaps having, I think it discussed having like a fly car in town or whatnot for those hours or something like that. Or issue an RFP to get those services and see what that cost would be. That was the 2010 report. Then as I read the 2013 report, it seems to give a much different picture and seems to say that we're not doing well. And that's sort of what concerns me today. And I'm just going to read the part, there's various places in there that say that, but on page 30, it says the 2 roads that are in front of the town are either to continue in the current manner, which is in our opinion self-destructive. The other alternative is to rationally look at the suggestions or recommendations found in the following pages and accept that change as the way to make the Southbury EMS system strong and survivable. So I just want to reconcile that with the discussion we were just having as to what this report was seeking to accomplish and what it was proposing, and whether a change, I read the report as recommending a change and that the town better start looking at changes. What I'm hearing tonight is more along the lines of, we were providing alternatives, but you have a good system. So I want to sort of reconcile those things and understand it a little bit better.
I'm going to let Lenny speak to this in a second, but part of that was talking about the fact that there are changes coming in the healthcare market, revenue changes. We didn't know whether the Southbury Training School ambulance would continue on. So the issue was, the system may not be able to survive in its current circumstances, so you need to be prepared. And it would be a good idea to have a conversation with those other services to see if consolidation made sense from an economies of scale perspective. Not that the system was failing, not that the system was doing poorly, not that the response times were of issue, because they weren't, as I recall. Correct me if I'm wrong. They were not.
They were not.
Okay, so Len can more further address your question.
And in the current model, we're also taking into consideration through the recent discussions that I'm part of this process. And for backdrop, before I went to work with Bob in consulting, I was the director of the Office of EMS, the position that Ralph holds now, for 9.5 years. And throughout my career at OEMS and throughout this process, and in deference to the folks that work every day at STS, I've been hearing that STS might close or might change its operations for many years, as you at the town. So our goal, Bob's and mine, and even mine again today, as the working with Southbury Ambulance, is to have a plan in place to be ready for some sort of abrupt change and be ready to cover and provide additional coverage to the community. And that's the vein from which this report was written, and it's also the vein from which the report that I presented, my PowerPoint slides to this group back in May, with the revenues and the different staffing models, was to give the community options. And I want to echo from my perspective, one important thing that shouldn't get lost here is having a second paramedic in town, which addresses your concern, sir, is always a good model. And I will look just to the west a bit to your neighbors in New Milford, where they have a regional system. And Bob and I were involved about 4 or 5 years ago now.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
Where the New Milford ambulance opted to go through the process, get certified at the paramedic level, and is hired and has paramedics on. Started out Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, 10 to 6, and now they've evolved to 7 days a week. They stayed within the regional model, but they have that dedicated resource in the community as an additional resource for the calls within New Milford. So that was the cornerstone and the template that we use to come to this community for SAA to do the same thing. Get started as a service, provide an additional paramedic in the community, and see how it builds. It gives you a safety net should something change radically with STS, and it also gives you that paramedic within the community, at least for the first one.
And then along those lines, because another impetus is one of the things we're being asked to do is to support SA's application with the state that Mr. Garcia was just discussing. The 2013 report, as I read it, it seemed to say to me, and I'm just looking for some clarity, that you would recommend one of the local providers to upgrade, but only if there was a consolidation of the resources amongst the 3 current providers in town. So can you discuss that and how that impacts the recommendation? The 13 report impacts what we're talking about now and what the relationship is.
In the 2013 report, under option 3, it says take over the provision of paramedic services through hiring of your own personnel for staffing of the paramedic service or working via a staffing agency. Under option 2, to talk about merging the 2 organizations in the agency into a unified service was to look at if they were willing, and I have to put this caveat as Bob did, they can't be forced to do that because of the current status of the statutes and the regulations and the service that they deliver, but it would provide a little bit of a more efficient service to have them under one umbrella. But that's purely a local option. It's a service level decision. So that's why there are those 2 points in that report.
So what I was referring to, and I just wanted to make sure, and again, like George mentioned, we're not completely up to date on all the terminology, so we could be reading things differently, so I just want to understand it. On page 19, when it talks about one of the recommendations, it says, apply for advanced life support upgrade to the paramedic level only if the 3 services were to consolidate under a single organization. And I'm just, is that just referring to something completely different? Is that only referring to if they all merge together and the town takes over? Like, I just wanted to understand the relationship to that in the context of being asked to support one of the things we need to evaluate to support SAA's application, which is just one of the providers.
When this report was done in 2013, the option of the town taking over the service or starting its own service was never in any conversation that I was directly involved with, nor was it a recommendation that we would have given. As Bob stated earlier, you had 3 services in town, you have 3 services in town. It's best to upgrade one of those services rather than start from scratch. This is a long, lengthy process. Some of the services have been in town for 60 years. So upgrading them to the paramedic level is a rather smoother transition than it would be to start from service, a brand new service with somebody new, or go out to RFP. So the consolidation was along the BLS component. The ALS could be taken on by one of those, and that's the perspective from which this was written.
And the other part of that is if you look at the 3rd bullet in red, it talks about if it was a single organization, or if, in this case, if it was a single organization that was providing it. The concept was that in theory, an entity in the town may be able to provide the service, at less than you were paying the outside contractor, and that was a point of discussion. I do not know that that would still be the case today. I don't know, again, what that would look like. However, going all the way back to 2010, there was a recommendation that one of the ambulance services consider upgrading. And I can tell you that the concept at that point in time in both reports was that that service that would upgrade would have been Southbury Ambulance. Strictly because they have the highest volume of calls, they had the ability to store the unit in their building, and they had the ability and the financial ability to do that. And upgrading, again, if you have a paramedic contract with Campions, which has been working well, having a supplemented paramedic in town would not only help the region, but it would also help the community. And if it's not costing your community anything, I don't know the proposal. If Southbury is proposing to do it, in the beginning at least, until they could prove that they would be able to take on the entire project at a negotiated price, similar to Campion's, but in town. In town is better. If you've got Campion overlaid with yet another provider in town, that's again better. And if it was able to be done equal pricing or slightly less pricing in town, that's yet again better. So, I'm not sure where you all are on that particular application, but as Lenny said, in New Milford, it made sense. In other communities that are thinking about it, it makes sense to supplement and allow that to happen if it can happen. I don't know the specifics right now of what's
So,
going on.
one of the discussions that has come up over time here is this idea of an in-town paramedic, whether that makes sense, whether we should move in that direction, and that's sort of what triggered a lot of this, and I believe part of the discussion that triggered SAA's application earlier this year. They're coming to us, and then the application. At the same time that that's going on, that SAA is applying to do that, still our primary provision of paramedic services to the town is an intercept contract with Campion where the paramedic comes from out of town. So one of the discussions was whether it made sense to look into a model where you still have an intercept model, as I understand it, but the paramedic, instead of coming from out of town, you have like a fly car in town. And I think that's sort of in line with your 2010, one of the things you were talking about, your 2010 proposals. So one of my questions is, for Southbury Ambulance, I certainly understand the benefits of them applying, upgrading, and then over time, I think they said, be like two years or so, 2 or 3 years, whatever, where they get to like full capacity on that. In the interim, does it make sense for our town? Would it be advisable for our town to look into having, instead of an intercept paramedic coming from out of town, a paramedic located in town, and determine the pricing on that, and and if so, what's the best way to go about that?
When you look at resources in EMS, whether it's paramedic or ambulance, dedicated resources, especially when you upgrade an existing provider, their infrastructure is already there. So you are upgrading with equipment and changing out personnel. So you have an incremental cost. So where if you have an ambulance that has 2 EMTs in it, and now you make it an EMT and a paramedic, the incremental cost is the difference between the EMT and the paramedic salary, but you already have an infrastructure with people there. One of the things we talked about in the report was that intercept paramedic, in a shared, merged system, would also be able to provide system supervision. That would not be the case if just Southbury were to upgrade at this point, because the other 2 providers are still there. But anytime you can say that a resource is dedicated to a geographic area as opposed to shared amongst geographic areas, inherently that's a better choice, if you can afford to do it. I don't know what the cost at this point would be to do. I don't know what the plan is, but the plan of having an upgraded intercept fly car in town with Campion still there backstopping the system, 2's better than 1.
Sorry, just one more thing on that, and then I'll, based on your the 2010 recommendation was to try and renegotiate a deal with Campion, or
Because at that time, no one was prepared or ready, and I think if you look at the recommendation was, but consider that somebody could upgrade.
right, and then or issue an RFP. So during this process, potentially where one of our providers is going to go through and upgrade, would one of those 2 recommendations still be advisable to pursue now to begin determining the feasibility of providing that service to the town sooner?
I want to go back to your earlier question about the crawl, walk, run scenario with Southbury Ambulance. If there were to be, or were discussions prior to the beginning of this, if you went to Southbury Ambulance, and I've discussed this with Geraldine and her team, and said, listen, the town would like to have a fly car model, we'll support you in upgrading to the paramedic level that you could provide either 12 hours a day or 24 hours a day with the right support from the community, you wouldn't need that extra RFP there'd be a ramp-up period. You're already under contract with Campion. Campion team has been very amicable to this town for decades, and they would not, in my estimation, leave you high and dry. But you could have that discussion starting tonight with SAA and say, as we help you through this process and getting approved at the paramedic level, would you deploy it in a fly car and provide the same service that Campion is providing to the community? All those things are open for negotiations. It would keep you stable with Campion as a backstop, as Bob pointed out, and you would work with, in concert with the folks from the Department of Public Health to stay within the regulations. But having that resource, whether they wear a Campion ambulance uniform or a Salisbury ambulance uniform, is here within the community. So all those things can be worked out. Every model, there's 169 jurisdictions and 2 tribal nations in this town, and there are 190-something EMS systems and services. So every system is different, and I have to harken back to the New Milford example. They did just that. It's still part of the Campion Regional Paramedic System. Continue to do their contribution. They wanted that dedicated resource in their town, and they've expanded their hours over the last 2 years. I just wanted to further expand.
If I may, I just want to clarify that New Milford New Milford took over the entire, the paramedics crawl, walk, run was for the entire area of New Milford, not just one section of it. Is that correct?
The PSA in New Milford, and the director will correct me if I'm wrong, is still part of the region, right? It's not assigned. So it's not assigned. But they're providing it within New Milford, and when called upon to go to
The entire town of New Milford,
Yes.
not just part of New Milford.
That's
It's the
correct.
entire town. That's what I'm getting at, is that the upgrade was, so they're providing paramedic service on a crawl, walk, run to the entire town, which would be similar to providing paramedic service to both the PSA of the training school, Heritage Ambulance, and Southbury Ambulance area of town.
It would be comparable, yes.
Comparable. Okay. That's just want to be,
Again,
that's not.
all subject to discussion and good.
Well, again, it's difficult, we have difficult enough time with multiple services. Not that that's a bad thing, but we have more, and the report is saying, really, the more services, the more layers, the more complicated it gets, and the harder it is to deliver efficient service to that. George, did you have a question?
Yeah, getting back to the start of SAA, thinking about getting into the ALS paramedic business. Right now, we pay Campion, it's like nearly $300,000 a year. It's like 280, I think. Something.
And it has to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Almost 3. And if SAA were to take some of that volume, would Campion, in your opinion, be willing to renegotiate their price so that we could pay less because we wouldn't need them as much? I don't know how that works. Just wondering how that, because otherwise, what would happen is we get less reimbursement from the Campion ALS calls. So we end up paying more for ALS service with SAA coming in, unless Campion is willing to negotiate. Do you think they would be?
I don't speak for Campion, but I know they've been a very amicable partner in this process. I spoke to the leadership there just last week about these deliberations, and they said that what they've said for as long as I've been in the system, they want to do what's right to help the town. So again, you have to make an overture. You have to know what you're asking for. If they're relieved, and I'm making assumptions here, if they're relieved of some responsibility of numbers of hours, and don't have the costs related to staff for those numbers of hours, I mean, I can only imagine they'd be willing to look at it, but those are the discussions that the town, with your 3 providers, need to have with Campion to at least start the discussion, but I can't speak for them.
But Len, the metric they probably used.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. Ma'am.
Yes, Jennifer.
Thank you, sorry. The metric they used to initially charge us for this intercept paramedic had to be based on some amount, must have been call volume.
It was also based at the time, I think, was on revenue, a flat per paramedic intercept base. You know, we're gonna charge you X for the paramedic service, and then they just expounded it to 24/7. That was when you, like 15 years ago.
15, 20 years ago.
Contracts.
Yeah, they, whatever their internal metrics are, they've not shared their metrics as to the price. Your pricing is consistent with other communities that they work in for that service. There are other communities that have dedicated paramedic resources in the town. It is equal, but they are also doing all of the ambulance transportation in those communities.
So they can do the billing.
Right. When you go into, and I've seen pricing all over the state, when it is a dedicated intercept unit, I've seen prices that have topped 3 and mid-3s for that dedicated resource. So as I said in 2010, and as we said in 2013, the price point is fair given what it is you're asking them to do, and the timeliness with which they're doing it, and the depth with which they are giving you service, even though it is not a dedicated resource in their town. They are here when you need them, and unless somebody's shaking their head behind me at the moment, I've not heard stories of them not being available. So the system is working.
The system's working, and they're actually in favor. I think they've even given their support of SAA's application.
They have.
So,
They have.
I mean, that,
Can I ask something else? We could put an RFP out that asks for an RFP with a paramedic fly car remaining in town during the hours of, say, 8 till 4:30 or 9 to 5 or whatever. We could ask for that same additional service during those hours to our town. That's a
As
possibility.
long as you have the budget for it.
And they would give us a number and we could, I'm just saying that if it's 280,000 and there's 80,000 in billing during those hours, we are really working with 360. Is that,
In the presentation I gave you, we estimated that if the model were to go through with SAA's coverage, that they would cover approximately 260 ALS transports, and it would reduce the town's revenue by $37,705.02, and that was.
and how did you come to that number?
I calculated the numbers of calls based on the ALS revenue that was being billed, and that's how I came to
And
that.
divided it by the 24 hours?
No, sir, I just divided it by call volume, not by the hours.
So what you didn't do there is look at the hours during the day when the maximum number of calls are made and what that revenue loss would be.
I looked at, those numbers were for 12 hours of day coverage, yes.
12 hours of day coverage.
Right.
Any other questions? Yes. Sure, Jeff. I'll recognize you.
Good to see you again.
I just have a couple of questions. One, with regard to what your report was saying in 2013, and whether it was saying that the current provision of service was good or effective or as good as it could be. There was one part of the report that said the Southbury EMS system currently is not fully functioning as efficiently as possible with the best interests of the citizens and visitors to the town. That's on page 31. Report. And I think that's sort of part of what you were saying was that was a result of it being divided into 3 services and could be more efficient if it was consolidated, hypothetically, correct?
Correct.
So you also anticipated that the state of Connecticut might at some point give up or not want to provide ambulance services in the Southbury Training School area, and how that would impact the provision of services, right?
Yes.
So what we currently have, as you know, we have the state, we have 2 volunteer associations providing service. The state indicated earlier this year that they were, in fact, going to give up that PSA. And the town made an application to do that. And then right behind the town, a private provider has filed an application, which is currently pending. So it seems to me, in terms of the long-term goal, if possible, to have a consolidated and efficient service for the town, that long-term goal is much more possible if the providers that are contemplating that are 2 volunteer services and/or the town and/or the state, then after a private provider gets a vested property right in a service area within the town, and then we have to negotiate with them, and why would they want to give up what they've given? Am I wrong about that?
I don't know that I can say you're right or wrong about that, because, I mean, you have, at this point, you have 4 providers in town, if you count Campions.
Yes.
What I didn't hear in what your explanation question was whether you were gonna have 4, or now you're talking, well, you're replacing one with another.
One is a contract, the other are rights granted by the state. So in terms of what you're talking about, well, it could only be done if it was voluntary. That's because there are rights granted to the state to 3 different providers. And my question really is, if one of those providers now is a private company with a vested property interest, it seems to me that the long-term goal of consolidation through an agreement becomes much more problematic and much more unlikely.
Hypothetically, you're potentially right. I mean, you have a commercial provider in town now, which is Campions. You have a long-term relationship with them. I don't know what the parameters are of the application. I haven't seen it. Don't know what they're asking to take over. Whether it's I'm gonna make an assumption here, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the assumption is that STS is getting out of the business and a private provider is saying we'll take over what they were doing, and I don't know that that's true, but if that is the case, then that has some restrictive component to it, which is we're gonna take over this piece, not global. So therefore, you would have to worry about that particular piece, and that has kind of always been somewhat autonomous. So they're gonna kind of be an island off to themselves. But again, without seeing the application and knowing any more about it.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, you're gonna have 4 providers in town. The question you have now would be whether or not those 2 commercial entities would work well together in making sure that revenue flowed properly and call volumes went properly. And can't say that it wouldn't, because they tend to do that in other places, but can't say they would either.
In terms of the goal of having a single entity that is essentially a not-for-profit entity, if there's a for-profit provider in that mix that's not contractual like Campion, but has vested property interest granted by the state, that's a more difficult problem.
Well, the intention in the report, and if I kick me under the table, the intention in the report was that if STS were to go out of the ambulance business, that would be assimilated, that volume would be assimilated by the remaining 2, not necessarily enter another party into the mix. So that would be new information. But that was the assumption with the report, was that 3 would go to 2, and eventually 2 could potentially be 1. Not, we'll plug and play a different partner. So that's what the report
Sir,
was.
if I could, are you the town's attorney? I
Yes.
wasn't introduced.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
Hi, sir. I just want to clarify the timeline. Long before I was ever aware that the town was making an application, Geraldine and I did meet with town leaders, well before, months before. And at that time, we were advised to hold off on that, and we waited about 5 or 6 months. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact dates. It's a couple years now. And then the town's application was, unbeknownst to me, and I think to Geraldine, and she can clarify. So we were moving along with those timelines, but we did come to the town in good faith and said, this is what we'd like to do. We'd like your support on this, and we were advised that it wasn't a good time, so we held off for nearly 6 months. So, and I was present in that.
And let me clarify, one of the reasons we said to hold off, and you recall at the meeting, it was just after the recommendation of the EMS committee that we do a flag car paramedic, and it was within a month of signing that when this came out.
That's correct. Yes.
So it would seem to me they should have brought that sooner so we could have dealt with it before signing that contract to do the right thing. But I'm not going to get into that. In your opinion, if the town was able to secure the BLS and the ALS of the BLS of the training school, and under the control of the town of Southbury, would it be easier to make that transition than doing with another entity or with a state?
I'm not sure I can address that adequately, but the town in and of itself, maintaining the control of that is in and of itself another entity.
I agree.
So you've just
But at that
replaced
point,
entities
with the
with-
control of the PSA for BLS, the town could determine, because they could determine if we could give it to another entity or do, let's say 2 Southbury ambulance or whatever, it would,
Again, without knowing, and I don't know what the PSA obligation and parameters are for the Southbury Training School. So it's that, what is that, the borders of that parameter piece? If it's the grounds of Southbury Training School, then you're just replacing grounds of the school with grounds of the school. It's not, if Southbury Training School goes out of business, you now have an ambulance that can provide service in other PSAs except through mutual aid. Because Heritage and Southbury have their own PSAs. So you can't take one and get a small one and decide to make it a big one. So that,
you can't increase the geographical area of the PSA if you're willing to do that.
not my understanding, and that
Okay.
you have a director and a former director who can address that a whole lot better than I.
I mean, there's obviously ambulance services that take care of an entire town.
Yes.
And given that the town's this big and the training school PSA is this small, and services only essentially 200 residents there, and there's staff out there during the day too. But it should seem like if you could do that, it would, a possibility to do that, it would be,
There's a process codified
Of
in
course.
statute that was upgraded several years back, and Director Kohler can give you chapter and verse. And if the town were to take over the Southbury Training School PSA and then wanted to go to the larger community, it would have to there'd have to go to the commissioner, there'd have to be a hearing, you'd have to prove that the other two providers are not meeting their obligation. It's not just, hey, we're this little piece and now we want to get bigger. This is the protection that was
no,
built
no,
in years
no,
ago.
I'm saying the other way around. Or the small piece, we're willing to work with them to get that moved over into their, and create that geographical area less, or additional of that small piece of,
Right, if you decided today, Mr. Manville, or this body decided today that STS was gonna go away, that STS could, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ralph and Jean, because it's happened in Woodbridge and other places, they could surrender that PSA back to the Commissioner of Public Health, because it's under his purview, with guidance from Ms. Kohler and Ms. Speck, and it could be reassigned to another provider that was willing to take it on. Probably be a hearing to make sure that the new provider had the right capacity to do it. But it's been done in my tenure as the director, service goes bankrupt or somebody's not meeting their obligations, the commissioner has authority to temporarily assign it and then either go through a hearing process or make a permanent assignment if someone is willing to take it on. So,
any other questions of, I don't want
I have a question.
George?
We have talked a little bit about restructuring the EMS commission in town, and I think it was a recommendation in a Fitch report and also in a Holsworth report, each one of them, I don't remember which one now. Could you talk to that a little bit? I mean, apparently our EMS committee structure is suboptimal. What would you say about that?
You mean?
go ahead, you.
The recommendation that you have in the report talks about, through a consolidation and making, and having, right now you have an EMS committee. The recommendation was to consider an EMS commission, which has different rules and regulations that go with it, as I understand it. The committee is made up of a user group, basically, it's what it is. So the towns there, the ambulance services are there. For what you have in the system right now, that works. If you were going to move to outsourcing an agency, or you were going to move to needing an oversight board that had more formality because you were funding it, then a commission would be a better structure, in which case the director of the ambulance service would not be sitting on that particular piece. But the recommendations that were made were all based and predicated on the fact that you were overseeing a budget and funding that budget, which is, as I understand, not the case, and wasn't the case then.
It's not really the case now, except for the camping contract.
Correct. And in fact, the Campion contract is in fact a service agreement with Campions for service. And you are the recipient of funds from the ambulance services through the bundle billing process that actually helps subsidize that contract.
Right.
So actually, in this town, the majority of the funds flow from the ambulance services to the town rather than the other way around. So in this case, the user group makes sense. We were talking about down the road if.
Okay, I understand that now.
Jennifer?
Several recommendations, very good ones, actually, in both reports. I'm just curious if they were ever implemented, and I don't know enough about the 911 dispatching. But one was a uniform dispatch procedure. Do you know if that was put in place, Len?
Geraldine,
I don't know.
Joe,
can you talk
do
to that? Oh, sorry.
Do you know, Len?
I don't know.
Okay, so
I
the
don't-
last
And the
one,
other thing,
when we get your,
okay, and the other follows up on that is capture the data on paramedic utilization. Were you able to do that in your scenario when you were giving us those hours?
Yeah,
That is a skill
I
set
had
that we
the
can do.
numbers that were
now.
dispatched and transported as paramedics, yes.
So we can do that one
Yeah.
now, okay.
Is that
and-
coming from the town or from Campions?
That's coming from Campions and from Geraldine.
And Gerald's?
Oh, so it's not from the 911
Not from the
dispatch.
911 center, no.
So it doesn't, well, we need to find that, I just would like to know that, if our 911 dispatch has, the uniform dispatch procedure's been put in place, and if they are able to capture data on paramedic usage, just because in the 2010 report, on page 9, the first recommendation speaks to the fact that, we should be able to have sharing of information, and we didn't have that capability back then, so I just want to know if we have it now. It seems like something we should have.
okay.
Is that-
Along those lines, there was another recommendation here I was curious if we've done anything with, and that was yearly patient care quality audits. Do we know if
We can ask,
we've done that?
SAA,
Can we ask?
I know they do some in-house stuff, I don't know about external.
We made a recommendation of a company to do it if we're not,
Yeah, no,
Right.
it
in Massachusetts.
recommended Gerard and Associates says we should do it yearly, 25% of the,
Yeah,
can
we'll-
we ask Geraldine if?
well, let's get through here first, we've got some questions, we can, when we call her up, we can ask those questions, if that's, rather, for efficiency, let's stay with this first, and then we'll, if that makes any sense. Len, in the 2013 report, page 30, you speak of that 20% of EMS organizations may not exist. Do you, and that was in 2013, the report, do you see that this is proven to be an accurate concept still, as 2020 is only 14 months away? That EMS organizations will not exist, 20% of them, by that time?
Based on my experience, and Bob can give you some more national.
And I'm not
data.
criticizing, because
No, no,
sometimes things.
No, services are having difficulties. It's predicated on differentiations and reimbursement. As Medicare reductions are done and Medicaid reductions are done, services are having more and more trouble being financially viable. And the most important component of that is staffing. 30 years ago, lots of folks were not two parents working, and the volunteer fire service is dealing with the same ills. And so that's where those recommendations are. And I have direct knowledge of several services, unfortunately, within New England that have gone away because they don't have folks or not enough financial backing.
Okay, so,
And I can further
Go ahead.
address that number, that's my statistic, that was my number that I made a prediction back in 2013. And at that point in time, we were getting reports nationally of an ambulance service, almost an ambulance service a week, that was closing its doors, consolidating, merging. And at that point in time, there were 17,000, as we had a list compiled from each of the state offices, of about 17,000 operating ambulance services. The last time we updated that list, which was 18 months ago, that system was in just over 15,000. And a lot of that is not necessarily bankruptcy, it's exactly what Len said. It is, we don't have enough people, so it's consolidation. Hospitals have been getting back into the ambulance business and buying services, and starting up services again, where for years they ran in the opposite direction.
why would a hospital want to get into an
Because-
ambulance service?
Because at this point in time, being able to move a patient, it's called throughput in the industry. You have a patient that comes into the emergency department and you want to admit that patient. Well, you have a patient up on the floor that's ready to be discharged, but you don't have resources to move that patient out. So therefore, things start to back up, which is why you see billboards with it's a 3-hour wait, it's a 4-hour wait, it's a 20-minute wait, trying to identify that they have capacity to take you where other folks may not. And if you are on the ambulance at all, you will go into many hospitals and find that you are 3, 4, 5 ambulances arriving, you know, with no beds to put them in. So the hospitals are now starting to look at ways to move those patients where the commercial providers that they were working with may not have enough capacity to serve their individual needs on demand, and going and saying, we want 2 ambulances or 3 ambulances dedicated to our needs,
No,
not
when you talk
system
about
needs.
ambulances taking them out, are you talking about what we call transport, not
Correct.
emergency? So it would seem that the transport license is a very valuable license?
Licenses have some value, but
Transport licenses would
There
give
are
that
very-
service to the community,
it would, but there are few in this state.
and the training school
I
had
believe-
one.
They have a certificate.
Okay.
There are 2 types of services in the state, certified and licensed. Certified providers, they have a license?
Okay.
They are licensed?
Oh, hold on.
Okay.
They're licensed.
There was a public act that was passed.
They have a transport license.
But that license is not transferable, is it?
They're a licensed service.
Correct. So that license is valuable as a transport service similar, because there's people actually in the,
That can't be transferred because it was a state agency.
So, let's have time out. There is no such thing as a transport license.
okay,
You're either licensed as an ambulance service, or you're certified as an ambulance service. And depending on which of those you hold, you have different responsibility. Both of them, the licensed service has a responsibility to the 911 service.
so it seems that hospitals are having trouble transporting patients out. There's a demand for that, is what I, Glenn, as you pointed out in the 2013 report, the current system has 3 transport providers, is neither efficient nor economical. Is this still your thought?
I'm sorry, it has 3, why did you?
Three providers. Is this, on page 13, whether it's efficient or economical on page 13? Is neither, on page 13, is it neither efficient nor economical? I'm wondering if that's still your thought.
It is.
Okay. And so the concept that one municipal service with Heritage Village Ambulance Association is a first responder organization upgraded to paramedic with a full-time EMS director to oversee the new organization, as suggested on page 30 of your report, would it be in the best interest of the town as a whole?
To go toward that model?
Yes.
Yes, I still believe that's accurate.
Okay. And if the concept of only one provider for EMS transport would be the most economical and efficient, then would not the same be held true for the paramedic level?
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Yeah, I'm not clear.
So if the concept of only one provider for the EMS transport,
Right.
transport
Yeah,
service,
the basic life support.
would it be most economical and efficient? Then what I'm asking is, if that's true, then would not the same be hold true for the paramedic level also?
That's up to the local to determine, the local community to determine. You're saying, does the paramedic have to be from the transport service?
Okay.
Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, whatever model the community would like is how it's done.
Okay.
Given the current model and the fact that you have 3 entities plus the paramedic provider, and it is without cooperation, consent, and desire for agencies to merge, you have 3, potentially, you have 4, potentially 3, or plug and play a new partner, 4 parties in the system. Having that paramedic from the Campion system is valuable. Having an additional paramedic in town is viable and makes some sense. The redundancies that we were talking about and the efficiencies that we're talking about is you have 3 agencies that are purchasing vehicles that you may or may not need as many if you're running them independently, if you're running them consolidated versus independent. You have 3 insurance policies. You have 3 accountants. You have 3 attorneys. So arguably, merging those types of efficiencies makes some sense in the overall running of it. The difference is, you now are talking about more full-time employees and benefits, which is why you're back to 1.9 or above to run the entity. So there are some efficiencies if you can still run the service the way you're running it now, with some volunteers, et cetera, in there, which was the point. The point was to see if the parties wanted to sit down and come up with a way to restructure the system taking all the pieces that currently exist and mashing them together. Going to a municipal organization with municipal benefits, municipal retirement, municipal pay structures may or may not be more efficient. And that's something to be determined. And again, the data on which we predicated those comments, 90 days from now is going to be 6 years old.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Go ahead, John, sure.
In your 2013 report, you had this scenario that, of a hybrid called either a modified certification or a modified license. Has that ever come to fruition?
No.
That seems like it should.
No. That never saw the light of day.
That would require an act of the General Assembly.
Oh.
Lots of
well.
consensus.
Arthur? No. First, thank you guys for taking so much time. Thank you both also. So I go back to, I'm looking at, there was a PowerPoint presentation that accompanied the report back in, I think it was 2013. I don't think this was the last time you came in. I think it was back in with the report. And it summarized the staffing recommendation, and it was tied to the utilization you were looking at for efficiencies. And the recommendation there was, and I'll read it straight, begin a conversation. We couldn't force it because they're independent entities, but begin a conversation between SAA and HVAA on consolidation of the services into a single lead agency and plan for the potential of STS closure. We're there. Talked about paid crew number 1, paid crew number 2, former HVAA transitions to non-transport first responders, and then it said, have that new unit, that new entity, merged entity, not town-owned, still an independent 501c3, but a merged one, apply for an advanced life support upgrade to the paramedical. And that then takes me back to what was one of the recommendations in the 2010 report. So now we're looking 8 years ago, which was your second option, which you didn't end up making as the final recommendation, but it was upgrade the existing ambulance provider, and you said the most likely one would be SAA. So I come back to that is in some ways where we're at, other than those consolidations, finding those efficiencies by taking two entities, those two entities and making it one. In that case, we'd really have 3 entities in town: STS, a merged SAA, HVAA, and Campion, still providing the service they provide, backup services. So taking into account, and the numbers are going to be different. Even the 2013 report is coming on 6 years. Coming on 6 years old, so those numbers are certainly not going to be better. They'll be bigger, most likely. They'll be bigger. And another recommendation in the 2010 was to start a new town-run municipal service called Southbury EMS, which you didn't recommend either as doing. And from this conversation, it seems like you still wouldn't recommend that. Or the cost ramifications, might not be there. The ROI might not be there because we potentially have a lower level of service or fewer resources than the other option. So I keep coming back to where we're at today, which is we have, I think, one, there are some very good recommendations here, which we haven't done. One, it goes to Campion. Go back to Campion and have a conversation with them. They're our longtime partner. We're all business people here in some way, shape, or form. You'd rather keep some business that you've had for a long time than lose all of that business, and you're usually reasonable. And if they're gonna be providing fewer men or women hours, and fewer personnel and fewer staff that they need to, they wouldn't expect to be paid as much. I think that's not unreasonable to consider. The other part is, and when we get to the next round and ask, Geraldine and George potentially to come up and talk, and give an opportunity to talk to them directly, is that something that would be considered as well, to find some additional efficiencies in the operation of the service? Because I'm going back to these 2 reports, and I'm wondering if that happened, would you have gone back to option number 2, of upgrading an existing ambulance provider, which is on the table right now today, of, if we could find some more efficiencies in operating it. Because I do believe there has been some efficiencies found in the communications center in some dispatch, and when they come up, we can ask Geraldine to confirm that. Because I do think there has been a little bit of progress made on that front. This has been very good. This is exactly what I needed to at least get some insights from you guys, a little bit more information. I still have a million questions, but I think there are elements of both of these recommendations back from 13 and 10 that are still relevant today. I think one of the concerns that I had, certainly I think some of us shared it, is, and I think Bob, you shared it, these are almost 6-year-old recommendations. No doubt the numbers are going to be different. How different, we don't know. It's until you do a full analysis and we look at the call volumes and we look at what's changed. Our town's gotten older, and my assumption is that our call volume's probably gotten a little bit higher because of that. And just the dollar is different today. So I just think that I'd like to, unless anyone else has questions, begin to move on to our current providers and begin asking them some questions in light of this with the application that's currently in, especially from SAA on the top of my, in the back of my head, to see where they stand. So thank you, John.
Okay.
George?
A question had come up here, and the answer I think we have learned, but I just wanted to ask, since we have all these esteemed experts here today, thank you very much.
I'm not sure that's,
Maybe they're not so esteemed.
Esteemed or behind.
no,
Okay, well, good that they're here too. There was talk that the town could acquire the PSA for the ALS service without having the BLS PSA or a BLS PSA. Is that possible, or is that just not possible?
I think that we'll bring them, I think we'll bring them
No.
up next to ask that.
There was a head shake. No.
I think it's a no. I just wanted to hear from the authority.
It's a no. You have to have a service before you can operate as a paramedic service.
Thank you.
Okay,
Jeff, can I-
are there any other questions?
Yeah, can I just ask a question on the, we've been talking about how this is 6 years old. It's old data, things change over time. Things even changed between 2002 and 2013 report. What would be entailed in updating this?
Finding a consultant that could do it, because I can't, capability-wise. Probably your best bet is right there. Did the 2013 report, knows the system, but it would be a start. I mean, you need to start and refresh everything that's there. Call volumes, budgets, where people are at.
So it's something that you're not able, you personally, the Holdsworth Group is not able to do?
Correct.
Okay.
Timing-wise and capacity at this point is not a project we can take on at this point.
Mike?
So, and you certainly aren't required to answer this question, but if you were in our shoes, and you're looking at this, and you're looking at a 6-year-old report, and it's something I've said, I think it's something Selectman Buxbaum has said, I think Selectman Naylor said it, is we don't know enough to know whether a report from 6 years ago is still relevant today, because a lot of things change. Technology in the EMS world may have changed. Protocols, best practices may have been learned and updated and discovered in what is, in many industries, 6 years is an eternity of time. So if you were in our shoes, to make the most informed decision possible, would you find a consultant to update this report based on current data, current status, state of the EMS industry as a whole? And, I think there's some concern, certainly from our Board of Finance, about, do we spend money on another report? And my point of view is, well, if it's been 6 years, and if that report's going to inform us better to make a smarter decision that has generational effects on the town, it's an easy answer. So,
Can I make a comment? Right now, the ambulance services run without any financial support from the town, which is incredibly wonderful in my opinion.
There is the par that's paid to them, and then there's.
Well, there's Campion, I understand.
No,
yeah.
par. For volunteers, there's
Oh, there is?
a par, yeah.
But it's, how much money is that?
I don't have that top of my head.
So I'm interested in Bob's answer to
Yeah,
Mike's
thank you. question,
because it is a question that a number of us have been asking, so.
Well, I'll preface this with the chances of getting drummed out of the consultant's court and losing my card. But you have two reports in front of you that were done with the operators of the EMS system who are sitting in the room behind me. You have the director of EMS, the regional coordinator, and a former director of EMS who wrote this second report with 99% of this report was generated through his efforts. I did some editing on it. You have a template for data that you should be looking at. I would use the experts that you have in town to refresh the template and pay for guidance as necessary. And I think you have, as much as there have been, and I've been involved in this town for coming close to 2 decades, between the billing and the structuring of that and the structuring of the reimbursement for paramedics and the paramedic system, and going back to these reports. And every time it's been done, the questions have been asked of George and Geraldine and the state director at the time, and then a consulting report. And every time that that's been done, the information that had been given to the board at the time by the people running the system proved to be pretty accurate. You know, a couple tweaks here and there, a couple suggestions and things like that. I would hazard a guess and say you have experts in the room that could save you some money, and you should pay for someone to do a little bit of outside review to make sure that the template you've already paid for is refreshed properly. And again, I'll lose my consultant's union card for that one, but you really do have people that have been in this system for 20 plus years that have been proven correct with outside analysis.
Great.
They're sitting back there.
Thank you.
I thank you for that, because, correct, the template is there. I agree, you know, we do know that I know that the template is there if you've looked at it, and it's just what I've said, it can be upgraded without going out
It's like a
for a
spreadsheet.
full
you
new.
just change.
Correct,
We've,
it's just,
we've talked about refreshing it, making sure it's still relevant, and making
And there
sure
are
we have
people,
people
right.
in the room, including our current EMS committee.
Volume and billing revenue are gonna change, as
Right.
you pointed out,
Utilization.
but the system.
Right, the system structures,
That's,
right.
that's correct.
And that's what we're, I think, we're talking about is, great, thank you.
Jeff Tinley?
Yes, I think I know the answer to this, but you mentioned earlier, Fitch is a consultant.
Yes.
They would have the qualifications to do what you're suggesting, is to provide us guidance.
They would. I don't know if what their capacity is at this point.
And secondly, Jason was asking a question about the recommendation to do a retrospective patient quality audits and then ongoing audits. And I know we're going to ask the providers about that, but my understanding currently with the structure that we have, the town doesn't have the ability to conduct a quality audit because we have private providers who have that data, nor do we have the ability to require them to share the data from their audits with us. Is that correct?
That's correct at this point. Part of the data, you know, patient care-related data and patient demographic data, I don't know that you want to touch, being the HIPAA responsibilities and what have you. An outcome report, and again, they can address it better than I, but medical control does oversee and look at the quality of care that's provided. So while there was a recommendation for an outside entity in Massachusetts that has a proprietary program that they do and they give a report without doing individual patient data, the other part of that is what is the current medical control doing in the form of an audit, and in fact, they may be doing it.
Earlier, you asked if anybody was shaking their head behind you. I thought I saw, as you were talking about quality now and saying we couldn't get this done, some of the experts behind you were expressing, shaking their heads about it being a different.
Then,
I would have something to add to that. So there are things that you can share and things that you cannot share. So patient demographics that are protected, very hot in here, that are protected under HIPAA, they could not share. The municipality has the power under the statutes to run the EMS system for the town. The municipality has a duty to the state, that's codified in statute, that has to provide an EMS plan every 2 years to say how they're gonna deliver that plan in their town. If in the EMS plan, you put that you want performance measures from the providers that you have in your town, you have every right to ask for those performance measures. If they don't meet those performance measures, that is an avenue for you to hold them accountable and to say, this is not appropriate. So say that one of the performance measures is that they're gonna answer every call within 10 minutes, and I'm making these up, I'm not saying that that's what they are. And you get the data, you ask for their data on a monthly basis, and they say, we haven't made a call in less than 12 to 13 minutes. That's not an acceptable performance. You have that authority as a municipality, so they can share that information.
Thank you very much, that's very important. I think you know, we're in the process of revising our EMS plans, that's very helpful.
Your EMS plan is due January 1st, 2019.
We're aware of that.
Yes, I am aware. And so, those are things that you need to come together and decide on what you want into that plan and how you want the EMS delivered in your municipality.
Can I ask, when you're speaking to that, and I don't know what's I don't know for sure. HIPAA.
Yeah.
But would you say that, so we should not, in HIPAA, that who the call was for?
Right.
And what the time was?
You can't have the demographics, you can't have the patient's name, you can't have the patient's address, and you cannot have what the patient's called about. So if the medical record is protected by the federal government, that can't be disclosed. But you can certainly ask for what time it was dispatched, what time there was an arrival, and what time there was a transfer.
So there's a situation right now where Southbury Ambulance has people in court for collections with their names and whatnot. It's public information out there.
If that's public information, sure, that's a different process.
That's fine, it's out there. I mean, we're seeing who was transported and what their name was and whether it's a BLS or ALS. It is out there. So I just want to be clear that that's out there, yes.
Can I ask you a question of clarification?
Yeah, sure.
The towns, none of the towns can arbitrarily just dictate a time frame that may in
It
fact
has
be
to be a mutually acceptable recommendation
I
that
understand
they sign off on.
Yep.
So you are negotiating with ADC Ambulance, and you say, in my town of Southbury, I want a response time of 5 minutes or less.
That's an average, is that?
8 minutes is the average, but there's no data that correlates the response time to patient outcomes.
But it's an average is what I'm saying.
It's an average.
Not everyone
8
has to be 8
minutes,
minutes.
Right, 8 minutes or less, right.
Because we have,
There's towns that have contracts with providers that say, if 10% of the time you're more than 8 minutes, we're gonna charge you a fee for doing that. West Hartford was notorious with doing that with AMR. When they couldn't meet the time call, they would charge them a fee.
okay.
The other part of that contractually is, this goes back to the dispatch requirement and standardized protocols for dispatch. It also, most contracts identify priority life threat calls with one time frame and more routine non-life threat calls with a longer time frame. And Ms. Kohler is absolutely right. Typically, it's about 8 minutes for life threats. And I've seen as high as 12 to 15 for, a nosebleed with no priority symptoms, or, cold and flu and vomiting. And part of that is, is crew and community safety issues. You don't need everything going lights and siren through traffic for somebody who's vomiting. So you want to be sensitive to that, but that also makes for the prioritization of the calls and then the reporting of that prioritization.
And that process starts in the 911 center with the appropriate delivery of emergency medical dispatch.
Which goes back to your comment
Triaging
conversation
the
earlier.
calls and
Correct.
Any other, I'd like to bring up,
I just wanted to mention also a factor in those response times is geography. Southbury is
Yes.
a large landmass. There's unique, for instance, landmass, so that's also a factor. Response.
it is large and it's, yeah, and I think that's a consideration. Are you gonna hang around a little bit? I'd like to get Gene, Beck, and Raphael some time before it's, and that hour's not been changed,
Yeah,
so.
that's the actual.
We're excused, Your Honor.
Yes.
It's just-
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, you're looking at that thinking, oh, man, how long have we been here?
I feel like I'm testifying in a congressional.
I know.
Yeah,
We're not-
there's the Bible.
Not under oath, don't worry.
This is very formal
No,
for us.
we're-
Am I gonna get fired like Jeff Sessions?
No, we're, so,
Yes. What can we help you with?
I think there were some questions that people had here
Yep.
that involves you more, and I think one was the uniform dispatch procedure. Was there, it was,
That's gonna be a general question.
Yeah.
It's been implemented. It's a general question.
And there's state statute that,
Right.
all right, now,
to that,
yearly,
it's not OEMS statute.
I think that we kind of went over the yearly patient quality audits. Is there any question?
I think most of my questions were answered. I have one
Well, so-
question.
Mike?
I'm not sure you can answer, but I'll ask it. And it's really the you know, and we brought this up in prior meetings that we have had. You know, as we've been discussing our ambulance services, our EMS services in town. And it's, you know, as we stated, you know, when the town had initially submitted to go after the PSA, which we ended up realizing we, for a lot of reasons, couldn't get because we didn't have the BLS, so we couldn't get the ALS. Another ambulance service was in line behind us for that. And one of the questions I had was, what role does the town's voice, as we are responsible for the citizens of the town. That's our job. They've elected us to protect their interests.
Right, and you have the primary responsibility, and that primary responsibility comes through the EMS plan of where you decide how you're gonna deliver services to the town folk that you've been elected to. So, it's your responsibility to have ambulance service. It's for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So in that provision of that service, the decision of how you provide that service is left to the town. So there are state guidelines as to what you can and cannot do. So one of the first state guidelines is that there's PSA assignments. So there's been the terms thrown around that the PSA is sold. The PSA is not sold. The PSA is assigned. It is at the commissioner level, and the statutes dictate that we assign one PSA for each level for every town. That's the minimum. So there are a variety of PSA assignments. One is not really a PSA assignment, it's called the recognition of operation, and that's for a supplemental first responder. So you have a level of assignment for first responder, basic transport, and advanced life support. I'm just trying to give you some background information, so if you already know this,
No,
and you want
that's
me
great.
to just be quiet and say move
No,
on?
I think that's,
Please.
I think it's helpful.
yeah.
Okay, so those are the 4 levels that are there. 3 are actual assignments. 1 is, like I said, recognition of operation, okay? So presently here in the town of Southbury, you have 2 services that have been recognized for supplemental first responder. You have the Heritage Village Security, and you have the Southbury Police Department. What their responsibility to a 911 call would be to provide an EMR on scene so that they can start taking care of the patient. Then you have a first responder, and in that column, you have Heritage Village Association, Ambulance Association, you have Simsbury, right? Southbury Ambulance Association, and then you have STS as a first responder. Those are the PSA assignments. For the basic PSA, you have HVA, again, having the basic transport. You have Southbury Ambulance, and then you have the Southbury Training School that has also at the basic level. The only PSA that has not been assigned in the town of Southbury is the ALS. And you meet that requirement by hiring a Campion to cover you at the ALS level. You already have 3 transport services in your town at the basic level, and then you have Campion ambulance. A PSA can be given up by the organization that holds it. A PSA can be taken away from a provider who is a threat to public safety, and the commissioner decides that based on information that we have. And there's a third avenue, which is what's called an alternative provision. The town decides that those services are no longer needed by the people that are providing them, or they're not providing them in a manner of which they seem appropriate, and so they can then fill out a need for service application, submit that to the state, and say, we have a different way of wanting to provide care in our town, and here it is. That goes for hearing to the hearing officer, and as long as all of those requirements are met, and some of the requirements that are needed are similar to what we had with, because I know that the police department put in an application, and then we had a follow-up application for upgrade to the paramedic from the Southbury Ambulance Association. So you have to be able to have 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365 days coverage. Now, there's been discussion that we'll have it for 9 hours, we'll have it for 10 hours. You can do that. However, you're still responsible for a 24-hour coverage, and therefore you would have to have another contract that would cover those off times. And the regulations actually are in conflict, so I'll be quite transparent, because in one place it says that if you're upgrading to that level, you have 6 months to get to that level, and the other place it says you have 12 months to get into that level. So that would be something that we could negotiate.
Excuse me, 1 second, isn't that the folks who own the PSA, ALS? Isn't that, it's not assigned for Southbury, so.
It's not assigned for Southbury.
It's not assigned for Southbury, so why are we under, not that we wouldn't pay it, not that we wouldn't cover it, but disclaimer thrown out there, why are we responsible? We don't own the PSA, we don't control the PSA.
For the ALS, whoever controlled the ALS level PSA would be responsible for that 24-hour service.
But right now it's unassigned, and
It's
we don't
unassigned.
own it, so technically, we don't need to provide paramedic services
Right.
morally, obviously.
If you didn't want to, and that would be something that you decide with the citizens of Southbury. I wouldn't want to move to Southbury if I didn't have ALS coverage, but if that is a decision.
We're not doing that, that's not under consideration.
Planning to do that.
Just want to understand our
But,
options.
yes, but if you didn't want to provide that, you don't have it, you need have an obligation to provide ambulance service. It does not define what that ambulance service is, okay? So you have to have some level of care. Does it have to all be ALS? No. Could it stop at the BLS level? Yeah, if you wanted to. Yeah, you'd do that if you wanted to. So you'd have to have minimum staffing requirements. And so the staffing requirements are different for each level of PSA assignment. So for the first responder, it would be 2 EMRs that you would have to have at the scene of every call. For basic transport, you would have to have a first responder, emergency medical responder, and you would have to have a EMT. And at the ALS level, you would have to have an EMT and a paramedic. Associated with that are everything that you spoke of in that report. You have to be able to do data submission to the state because we give it to the National EMS information system. You'd have to be associated with a medical sponsorship, so you would have to have a hospital that sponsors and would look over and would provide the medical oversight. And that sponsor hospital also has the responsibility of doing some quality assurance aspect to it. And those are the basic requirements that you would have to do that.
You made, said in here, the ALS PSA, currently we have Campion coming in on a fly car.
Right.
I assume that's only one, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is one paramedic on that fly car.
Yes.
So they're only, just, when you say EMT paramedic, is that one?
One of each.
It has to be on The
If
fly
you're
car?
an ALS, no, if you are an ALS
Transport
service, transport
provider.
service,
That's
you
okay.
have to
Okay.
have a minimum staffing of a paramedic
Yes,
and an
paramedic.
EMT.
But because our ambulance companies do have the EMT.
Right.
They
They're
intercept
covered.
with the intermediate.
Just wanted to clarify that.
Yep, that's
Mike?
perfect.
So, first of all, thank you for your patience and information again. So just one thing, back to the 2010 Holdsworth report, actually, because I shut down my computer. But actually, had option 5, which they did not recommend, which was stop providing paramedic service.
Yeah.
And that means it says there's no paramedic PSA assignment for the town. That means that according to state EMS regulations, there's no way to compel a paramedic provider to remain. And it ends by saying, if there is no way to economically provide the service, Campion could be released from a contract. There'd be no repercussions other than displeasure from DPH, and I'd argue also every single resident who lives in our town. And it was stated specifically, this is not a good option. So I just want to let everyone know that. So I go back to, with the PSA unassigned, with the ALS PSA unassigned, could a provider come in and apply to OMS for that ALS PSA?
Yes, they could.
And if the town opposed it, how much weight does that carry?
So there's a couple of things that happen with an MIC, which is what it's called, is an MIC upgrade. Well, no, wait a minute. You're talking about a service coming directly new, has not been in town. So let's say Campion is interested in
It could be someone who's in town or
Right.
one of the other, you know,
Right.
an AMR or one of
Right.
the other, you know, providers.
So, if Campion, no, I shouldn't say Campion, if ABC Ambulance
Right.
applied for that ALS service, what the state would want to know is that they have the resources to be able to do it. They have, and resources both, human resources and both fiscal resources to be able to do that. The same duties that I outlined before, that they would be able to do it 24/7, 365, that they have the minimum staffing requirements, that they would be able to stay in business for at least a year. They have enough capital to stay for a year, and we'd take that. That application would be sent to the regional council, and we would get information back of their recommendations, yay, nay, don't have an opinion on that. And one of the other requirements is that they have a letter of support from the town. And we weigh that heavily to have a letter of support. We find that if there is not a letter of support from the town, we find the application incomplete, and therefore we won't go further with it, because that is part of the application process.
Great, thank you. That's all I have.
Any, George?
What is the financial obligation of the town if, in a hypothetical case, another entity had the PSA for the ALS service, and they say, well, we can't do it, we can't afford it, you have to give us some financial support, because is the town obligated to provide that money?
No, the town is not obligated to provide that financial support. The town has a conversation with that provider, and you try to come to a median, but you do not have a contractual obligation if you did not hire that and they were on their own, which happens. People give up their PSA for that reason. There's not enough call volume to be able to make a return on their investment, so they say, we're no longer going to be providing, ALS to this particular area.
So if someone were to acquire the PSA for the ALS, they're saying, okay, we can do this, we can afford it, we can cover 24/7,
Right.
365.
Yep.
And it's up to them if they can't to figure out.
Right, so if they couldn't cover it, they would be in violation of state statutes and state regulation, and then we would, if there was a complaint that was lodged, we would have to open up a complaint and an investigation process. If we found that to be true, that they weren't meeting their contractual obligation of 24/7, minimum staffing, the data submission, the quality improvement, then we would have the ability to remove the PSA from that provider.
Jennifer?
Go ahead, Jim.
So a letter of support for an application does not act as a guarantee for that person applying?
No, there's always discretionary powers that are included in that. I don't have any example of where there was a letter of support and the the service was able to meet the requirement, that it would be denied.
Mike?
But conversely,
But actually,
ahead.
I
Oh, I'm
wasn't,
sorry,
I
hold
didn't
on.
mean it that, I didn't mean it in that way. I meant like as a guarantor for a loan.
Oh, no, 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 no.
So
no, no,
there's no
no.
obligation
No.
other than say, yes, we would
Yes, we would
that.
support you know, unless in the application it said that the town of Southbury is going to provide, and sometimes the town provides housing for the ambulance or says, I'll pay for the equipment or whatever. But if there's nothing in there and there's not a signed agreement between the town and that provider, you are not liable for any of that.
But, okay, so in our particular situation, we currently have the Campion contract that provides the obligation of the 24/7, even though we don't own the PSA
Right, at the ALS level.
at the ALS level, correct?
Are
Yes.
assigned. So it's important that
right,
we
Don't say own.
we don't
sorry.
refer
No, no.
to the
Sorry.
term ownership, because there's no ownership.
We don't
There's
have the
no purchasing.
assignment, we don't have the assignment of
Thank
the
you.
ALS PSA. But we have right now, the obligation under a contract to provide it. Basically. If we write a letter of support to one of the longstanding companies in town, organizations, it's going to be a modified, like a walk-run, I'm sure you've heard them say it before, right?
Right.
A walk-run, whatever.
Crawl, walk, run.
Something, yeah, 3 years, whatever. If during that 3-year period, if that's the scenario in which we write our letter of support, does that obligate us, or it doesn't obligate us to anything more than what we're currently doing while they're going through their stages? Got it? Never mind. Thank you for listening to me.
And it just, and just to finish that up,
Good to work that out.
if partway, 1 to say 3 years, in the second year, for whatever reason, the town doesn't feel it's working the way, or we think it should be done differently, are we obligated to stick with that model?
Okay, so the town always has the options. Remember, the responsibility of EMS rests with the town. It's your responsibility to make sure that it is being provided in an appropriate way. If you find that it's not, you have a couple of things. You bring the service in and you say, look, we're not happy with how you're providing the service. This is what we're looking for. And you set up some performance measures and says, if you're not going to meet these, we are going to then ask for you to relinquish. So the service doesn't have to relinquish because they have been assigned the PSA. So the only way that the town could take over that service level again would be to provide for an alternative provision.
But if we don't have the PSA, we're just providing a paramedic like we are now. And we were to say endorse this a model
Right?
where that during that time so let's say the crawl starts, the walk doesn't make it. Do we have the ability to say, you're not able to walk, we have a better way of providing this, we want this to go back or change in a different way? Do we have that ability?
You always have that ability through the alternative provision statute of saying that you have found that you have a better way, you're not happy, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to propose, that how we provide EMS for Southbury.
Mike?
So I want to sort of make sure I took my notes right. Today, right now, with the ALS PSA unassigned, if we were incredibly incompetent here, and none of us wanted to sit here in a year from now, we could, whatever the terms of our contract is with Campion, we can end that contract and make a decision that we're not providing ALS
Right.
to the residents of Southbury. And there is no legal obligation to the state to do so. We still have to submit an EMS plan, but that EMS plan does not require the provision of ALS level services to the residents of the town.
It's strongly encouraged.
You're right. No, and by the way, like I said, we have no intention of doing that.
It's
But I
strong.
just want
Speak for all of us on
Yeah,
that.
I just want to be really clear on that.
It's strongly encouraged,
Yep.
but there is no mandate
Right.
as it stands right now.
So the model we have explored, that we have explored, even still, that in that model, the ALS PSA could still be unassigned.
you can leave it unassigned.
Yep.
But just understand that if somebody comes and wants that PSA, of course you would have the opportunity to opine on whether
Right.
you would support that or not support that. It would go to the regional council, and it would then go for review. And if that review doesn't really find a really good explanation of why you might have not supported it, if it's not gonna cost you any financial. And so the one thing that is different from the perspective that Bob and Lenny represented today is they're representing more of a fiscal and financial responsibility. What we're presenting from a
Public
state
safety.
level is patient care.
That's what we want.
And so patient care, I'm not gonna let patient care suffer if there's just arbitrary reasons not to have that done. If it's not costing the town anything, they can provide the service, they're willing to provide the service, they have the capital, they have the human resources, why would we say no?
And I think we concur, and I think we would concur with that. I think what I was getting at is that if someone else did apply, and our opposition was based on, we have a better plan. We have a better plan that uses a service that has served this town for decades, that's comprised of both local volunteers and others. And here's our crawl, walk, run plan to get where we're gonna need to go. We're gonna continue our current process and start phasing that down while we bring it in-house. That would carry some weight as you make your consideration. And it wouldn't just be an arbitrary, we don't want somebody else in town. It would be, we have a better way to
You have to
take
present
care
your
of
case.
our residents.
You'd have to have an alternate plan that
Right.
would be enhanced patient care more so than the plan we already have at hand. So if your patient care would be higher with the plan that you have, so say, you know, our people are in town, we have much more of the resources.
Been here 50
Yeah,
years.
you'd have to make.
Great.
If that
Thank you.
ambulance, let's say hypothetically, somebody came in, they got ALS transport and ALS calls they went out on, they would get the billing for those calls.
They would do the ALS billing, yes.
Right, they would, whatever ALS, so
If
it's not
if they
inconceivable,
transport, they're gonna do the billing, yes.
so it's not inconceivable that ABC ambulance company comes in, says, I want the PSA, transport license, I will take the ALS calls in Southbury to cover ALS. They would be transporting, billing for those numbers of calls.
Correct.
Okay.
So in
Jennifer?
2016, you had, in Southbury, you had a total call volume of 3,462. And that's divided between,
Is that ALS or BLS?
no, that's BLS. Unfortunately, I don't have the number of what percentage of that is ALS. So you had Heritage Volunteer Ambulance that reported 1,150 transport. You had Southbury Ambulance that reported 1,950, and you had STS, I'm sorry, 362
And that's all based on
reporting.
data that's available on the website. It's all publicly available. That each transporting EMS organization, so by statute, the EMS organizations that transport patients to the hospital, so they have an ambulance, they put the patient in the back of the ambulance, they're required by statute to submit, to collect data based on that NEMSIS federal standardizing organization, and then submit it to OEMS, to DPH.
Jennifer, you had a question?
I forgot.
That's okay, we'll keep,
It's hot in here, Jennifer.
it is, when we switch from air conditioning.
She's a trooper, she's the one on the web.
Yes, sir, Ms. Holdsworth.
Ms. Hall, can you clarify one thing that was just said,
Sure,
that in response to the question?
sure.
I think the question was if an ALS provider came in with an ambulance and went to the PSA to provide paramedic service, and they transported those patients, they would be able to go for it.
Correct.
However, if they were not assigned at the transport level for that district, they could not go in. For example, it's a heart attack, we're gonna send ABC ambulance, even though it's in, for example, Southbury's PSA. They would be able to provide that ambulance, but the paramedic would have to get on the other truck.
If they were, depends on how they're providing ALS. If they're providing ALS with a fly car, and they would get into the BLS transport of whoever was there, they would have to do a bundle billing because you can't bill for more than one call at a time. If they had a transport ambulance and the dispatch was for an ALS and they went directly to the call and did ALS, they would be able to charge for that.
So, in that scenario, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
If a provider came in and said, we are not going to give you an intercept unit in the town. So let's say Campion's on the current contract. Campion says, we're gonna provide paramedics. We're not gonna provide flight cars anymore. We're just gonna send all our ambulances with a paramedic and an EMT on it. And we don't care whose PSA it is, because we're coming in as the paramedic, we're gonna take the patient.
No.
Okay, that's what I believe.
But if they own the PSA, if they
Right.
applied for the
If they own
PSA,
the PSA,
if they
If they
assign,
assign the
sorry,
PSA,
sorry.
yeah.
You know, transfer station, dump.
no, it's important because this goes back to dispatch protocols and assignment of calls
Right.
and assignment of PSA and vehicles you're paying for.
But if somebody was to come in and say, we have we're ALS, paramedic transport, we have the capacity, we're applying for that total PSA for the paramedic transport in Southbury, and we're gonna provide that, if there was a ALS call with a transport on their ambulance, they would get that. They would get all those calls billed. They would bill for all those calls because they made the call for ALS and transport, right? In other words, not a fly car. They have the PSA. They have an ambulance with a paramedic, an EMT, and they're the people who you need ALS, you call, they go. And they meet all the criteria, and they're gonna transport that patient. Essentially, they'd be able to take all the billing for the ALS calls for the entire town.
We would ask that if there were other services in the town, we would ask how each of the services would interact with each other, and that would be part of the application process, so that we don't have 3 ambulances screaming to one site. We want to make sure, and that goes to patient
But if it's a
safety.
dispatch as an ALS call, it would be the ALS.
However,
It would be
Okay.
the ALS that would go if
Okay.
it's a dispatched ALS call.
one of your other criteria for approval of that application is also the impact on the providers, correct?
The impact on the providers as,
So let's take the scenario we have right now.
right?
Let's say that Campion.
You can come sit up here.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm back here shaking.
I don't
So
hit
you
it.
have an unassigned ALS PSA.
Yes.
You have, let's say Southbury Transport's out of the picture, so you have Southbury Ambulance and Heritage,
Yep.
which have PSAs.
Yeah, they have PSAs for the basic life support.
Correct. So now, let's say AOR
Yes.
wants to come in and they're not doing business in the town,
Yeah.
but they apply to you and say, we want to do ALS in the town of Southbury.
Transport.
Yeah.
And we're gonna come only with transport providers. We're not gonna put any paramedics in there. Part of your consideration for that application would be the town's
Yeah.
feedback, would be the services feedback,
Yeah.
and would be the impact on the revenue loss, making the instability of Heritage and Southbury, because now 50% of the calls would go to that provider.
Okay, I'm not sure that our recommendations would be based on that impact of revenue.
Well,
calls.
stability of service to have it.
Well, stability of service, yes, but we wouldn't particularly look at to say, you know, you're gonna do 50% of the calls. Again, we're looking at patient care.
I understand.
Patient care is gonna be enhanced by having an ALS transport in the cases of someone having a heart attack, in the cases of someone having a stroke, in the case of someone having a bleed, and I'm talking a major
Correct.
bleed. They're gonna need ALS services.
But going back to the system that exists here, where you have an ambulance responding and a paramedic responding, and you get to the same place,
Yeah.
that patient care is still unchanged, doing it the way it's been.
Yeah, you can have it done that way.
Okay. I
Yeah.
just
I think what I'm
wanna
getting
make sure I
at,
heard.
the concern
Yeah,
is,
you did.
I don't know if this is the proper way to say it, but you get an ABC ambulance company who sees an opportunity to take all those ALS calls and the transports by applying for that applying for the PSA
By
for
assignment.
paramedic, that's by assignment, and they say, look at, no cost to the town, we'll provide the advanced life support, transport with a paramedic, a regular medic, meet all the criteria, we have the financial, and we're gonna ask for this. Is it conceivable that they could do that because it's increased service level and they are now taking those calls that are not being billed by our ambulance service now? They would be taking it, you're saying yes?
Yes,
Okay.
that's absolutely.
So that's been one of my
It's conceivable,
That's one of my concerns all along, it's been,
very conceivable.
correct, so,
But you also have to, the service that's coming in to apply for your ALS level, PSA at the ALS level has to also look at how many calls am I gonna get out of the town of Southbury? And if I'm getting 20 calls out of the town of Southbury, I'm not gonna expand my resources to go to Southbury where I have to pay a paramedic full-time, 24/7. I have to have the equipment and I have to have the vehicle to transport that. It might not be, you know, very fiscally responsible or a return on my investment, which is why we have problems supplying.
I agree with you, but there could be, I'm just saying, there's other people who,
There's a potential.
yeah,
There's always a potential.
okay. Yes,
I just had a question on billing. You mentioned bundle billing where there's a BLS and an ALS. We currently have a situation where at Southbury Training School, Campion, under our contract, provides ALS services that we don't bill for. We pay for it through Campion, but there's no bundle billing rate with the state. How can we get paid for those services that we're providing?
Well, you should have a contract with Campion Ambulance that they would give you a percentage of that billing. They would do the full billing and then retroactively pay you, but you'd have to have a contractual agreement with them.
so,
That raises a point, if I may.
yes, you may.
In your reports, you identify that there's like 18 to 19% of the calls for ALS go to STS, by which we are not reimbursed. And what I'm hearing right now, what I'm hearing right now is if we edit our contract currently with Campion, and we say, on that 20% volume of calls that seems to be going to STS,
Yeah.
we want to cut of the money,
Yeah,
we can do that.
yes.
But they could also say, go.
They can also say
Go
no,
No,
but
right.
you can also say then we no longer want to hire you. You
Right.
have that negotiation.
It's in good
And
faith
you will hire
negotiation.
another ambulance by going out for RFP.
They may factor that into the total profit.
They may have, which is why I was asking
calculation.
you this call.
But it's a good faith negotiation.
We don't know. We don't know if there's really for it.
Mr. Holsworth,
Just want to clarify one point without beating the horse dead.
we've been known to do that here.
Well, the conversation that you, a statement you made a minute ago about they would take those calls, those ALS calls that nobody's billing for now, you know, the transport piece. Currently, the 3 BLS providers in town are not only transporting those patients, but billing for those patients, and part of the revenue is coming back to the town. So if another provider with ambulances came in, that BLS revenue would now go to that other provider because they would be billing the total bill,
Correct.
and it would impact in a negative fashion Southbury and Heritage because they would not get the BLS component of that truck. to
But
be
what
able
I'm
to
hearing
subsidize their
here
operation.
is, that's not their concern.
I understand it's not their concern,
But
but
it's
it
ours.
should be your concern.
Yeah, I agree, it's our
And
concern,
I just
but,
wanted to clarify
Yep.
what we were all talking about.
right.
Yep.
And I understand the different roles everybody plays, but
It might be their concern because it would degrade the level of service perhaps, Southbury.
they're gonna look and say it enhances,
It all gets back to.
right.
Service and dollars.
It probably is
From our
not,
point
but
of view.
it could happen. That was a concern of mine of what happens if that was to happen, where are we at, what does that do? I think that's a legitimate concern about the impact of, and we do have somebody who's applying for some expansion and with the state, and where's this going, and what if they say we get, not only do we have this area for BLS, but we're also looking for the PSA for ALS, so they're gonna get, the STS could get that area for basic life support transport and pick up the rest of the town on advanced life support transport. You start to put those numbers together, and I don't know them, but if those numbers start to work, and for whatever reason, or they see a future whatever, I'm concerned about that, because I'm concerned about the other ambulance services, how they're going to respond to that, and then I think it could be somewhat legitimate.
So having said that, our patient care is our first, prerogative that we look at. Don't misunderstand that we're not taking into consideration the degrading of the service. So by doing that, and we're enhancing patient care, but then two other services fall, and there's no care to those citizens, that may not be what's in the best interest of patient care. So we take the overall into consideration. I'm just telling you, our guiding principle is to look at patient care.
As it should be.
As it should be, 'cause that's what we're hired for. But we certainly would take that into consideration.
Are there any other questions of, let's see. My question would be, could you explain what the process would be if Southbury Training School, what they must take to close their ambulance service?
So what's required by state statute is that they notify the Office of Emergency Medical Services that they are no longer going to be able to cover, and it's just a carve out, so it's not the whole, town of Southbury. It's that just the campus of the Southbury Training School. They would relinquish their PSA, saying we're no longer in the business of EMS, and we're not going to be able to cover that. That PSA would then be available. It would be up for reassignment. So the state has a couple of options. We can temporarily reassign it to someone because we want the area covered, or somebody could apply for that PSA and we would give them that PSA, or we could assign it on a permanent level, on a permanent basis.
So if this, go ahead.
If the state has not yet decided that it's going to relinquish the PSA,
Yep.
and somebody is in the area who has a PSA, can they say they want to extend their service into another PSA?
No.
And I think another question, and I lost my thought on that one, so we'll let Mike.
So while an existing area service can extend their PSA, if they applied for a PSA, knowing that they are already in the area, and also knowing that this is a very specific piece of property, I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
Would it be likely that one of those existing services would get serious consideration for that, because they're already serving the entire, most of the rest of the area?
They already have the ability to provide that service, and it would just be a carve out of the campus that they would add on. That would absolutely, and they could start immediately because they already have the service that they provide.
And I think this goes to a concept that we talk about a lot at the office, and we try to communicate this to the services, we try to communicate this to the town leadership in the process of their EMS plan, is the concept of the sandbox. It's so important for the town leadership, the EMS organization leadership, to all get in the sandbox and be having these conversations all the time. The best way to get to a robust, working, transparent, fiscally responsible system in any geographic area, whether that's a tiny, whether the town of Southbury, is unique and it's got 3 different distinct areas, but it's important for you all to be in the sandbox and be collegial and leaning forward to look to the future of what's, this is the perfect example of Southbury Training School. If you're in the sandbox all together, having those conversations now, that, should that PSA eventually become available, you're going to be knowing about that, but way before STS puts in, or DDS puts in that letter, that form to OEMS, and you can be talking with the other providers who are your subject matter experts in the delivery of EMS, because they're doing it every day, to have those conversations to say, hey, are you guys looking to, increase, would you be interested in taking this, and what are the fiscal implications, and all those conversations that would need to happen. But getting in the sandbox is so important for everybody in the town, not only you all, but the people that you serve.
So I want to ask So if the state tomorrow morning gets up, we're relinquishing our PSA, we're done, we're closed up, here it is. And you assign it to someone. Whoever that's assigned to temporarily, do they have to provide an ambulance for that and the one they already have? So with Southbury Ambulance, let's say they were to say, we can do that. They would have to have an ambulance ready
They'd have two
for
PSAs.
that PSA, that area, and still have one here also.
No. It's in the same town.
So it would
And
be
it would-
simple to say, so at that point you can say, okay, they give it up and you assign to Southbury, that would be one contiguous area
It would still
of
be two
responsibility.
Of responsibility. What you want to, what we would look at is, are they going to be able to provide the same level service that the Southbury Training School is? So right now,
Well,
the Southbury
if we-
Training School has a response time of 5.6 minutes. If you're telling me I want to be able to cover the Southbury Training School, but now because I'm covering the rest of the town, I'm not going to be able to get there for 12 minutes, I'm not sure I want you there, or I want to make sure that you have enough resources and not just ambulance resources, because most services do have one or two, and then they have backup from mutual aid, but you have the human resources to be able to do that.
Okay, so, because I think there was some confusion about that, and obviously we're all trying to catch up to this EMS world, and this EMS world is very complicated.
Well,
If you're not-
Connecticut is special and has had
Of
its
course.
very much so. And it's had its own rules for a long time, and they're very convoluted, and they have very passionate EMS providers that have strong opinions.
Len?
Mr. Manville, I just want to add an important point, that over the last 18 months that I've been working with Geraldine and her team, on numerous occasions, and she has emails and can give you specific dates, when STS is out of service or whatever vehicle doesn't have staff, there's an email that goes forth that meets the needs of the regulations, and Geraldine's been covering it. So I don't want the group to think, well, this is the line and we don't ever cross it, this happens invisible.
No, they go back and forth. I have learned a great deal over this process, and, but I think it's clear to know. I mean, when we talked about our application, one of the thought processes was if it was to come our way, we could essentially say this, the town could say, well, we're not going to be providing this, and work with Southbury to get that piece. That could be done, if it could be done, I think that was what we talked somewhat about. But I just want to make sure that that wouldn't require two ambulances, one sitting there. I mean, it's just 2 miles down the road. To tell
A
you
good
the truth.
example would be Morris.
Okay.
So Morris had Morris Volunteer Fire Department, the town of Morris, the geographic boundaries when I say the town of Morris. The Morris Volunteer Fire Department was the first responder PSA assigned and the basic ambulance PSA assigned. They relinquished both of those PSAs. And so now that 911 response needed to be covered, and the leadership in Morris went and approached Litchfield Volunteer Ambulance and said, is this something that you think you could handle as your organization? And they looked at the response times, they looked at the geography, and they said, yes, we do. And so they applied for the temporary, to be assigned the temporary PSA, LVA, Litchfield Volunteer Ambulance. And they were assigned the temporary, and then they were eventually assigned the permanent PSA. So Litchfield Volunteer Ambulance, they don't have a dedicated ambulance that necessarily sits down in Morris, but they have staffed up to cover the increased call volume and the increased
response time.
geography that they're required to cover by the PSA. So there's, again, it sort of goes back to how is EMS delivered in Connecticut, it depends.
Right.
Mike?
So I only have one final question, because I think these lovely ladies should be able to go on their way. And it's about the process of how PSAs get assigned.
It's like making sausage. You can't
Yeah, but also the PSA that we're talking about in this case which is the BLS for STS, let's use as many acronyms as we can because it's
Okay.
late, but for STS, right, is currently assigned.
Yes.
And my question is, can somebody get in line, essentially, and put in an application for a PSA that's already assigned to someone else, hoping and knowing, because for years we've been talking about this, right, that eventually it's going to be relinquished, and therefore they want to be first in line for that application? Or do you not accept applications for that PSA until it has been relinquished?
We would not accept that application because there's no assignment to be
That's
made,
right.
so though it would be, yeah,
Okay.
it would be rejected.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
Make a motion to excuse now?
You poor thing.
I just, let me just go down through my notes.
I believe we should quarantine Selectwoman Naylor.
Yeah, let's get it. Ebola. Have you been out of the country?
So, if after the municipal analysis, it is determined that the Board of Selectmen decide to support the Southbury ambulance application for their paramedic upgrade, what are the next steps after that?
So the application is already at the office, and I think it's been reviewed, and I think one of the deficiencies that has been identified is the lack of the support from the town officials. So with that support would be, is there any other missing item on there?
I'd have to review it again.
Yeah, so we would review the application to make sure that it fulfills the requirements that are set in that application. If those requirements are filled, then the application would be reviewed and approved. It also does go to the regional council. I think I mentioned that step, that the regional council has the opportunity to look at the application that's been submitted, and they may ask the service to come to the regional council meeting and present their application, and then they would give us their recommendation of whether they support, non-support, or want to be. If they don't give us any feedback in, is it 15 days? I think it's 15 days, it would be considered approved, that they would approve. So non-feedback is seen as approved in 15 days. That's from the regional council. Then OEMS would make that determination, and the PSA would be assigned.
The upgrade.
Do you know, are there many communities with multiple PSAs assigned to their town like Southbury? There are a number of them?
Probably.
Just- I say that because,
Yes.
woo, you know, it would be so simple.
Yeah.
But is that other municipalities? and
There's
towns?
carve-outs in other municipalities, just like you have, that have multiple. And there's also multiple supplemental first responders, because sometimes there might be an organization in a town that wants to provide the response, but only in their offices or.
Like Heritage Village.
Like Heritage Village, so yeah, there are.
Connecticut State University.
But more, I'm talking about the BLS and ALS, which, you know, I'm looking at this, what we're dealing with, and I'm just wondering if that's,
It's not just
You know,
us.
It's a
There-
mixed match.
Because many of the systems in the towns are based on fire commissions, you have PSAs that are carved up based on fire commissions, based on old standing cocktail napkin things in the town charter that require the service go out to bid every couple of years. There's lots of different ways that it gets broken up in a geographic.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember that Connecticut, it has a high volunteer system. About 70 to 80% of the EMS delivered in Connecticut is a volunteer. Volunteers might not have all of those resources, so then they contract with a commercial service to provide the ALS level. And that happens, it happens in, I particularly live in Rocky Hill, so Rocky Hill Ambulance does the BLS transport, while Aetna with the fly car provides for the paramedic. The same happens in Weathersfield. The same Newington actually does have paramedic on it, but they have backup from AMR. So a lot of towns usually have the basic through the volunteer, and then they may contract with paramedic, with a commercial service.
a lot of I'm hearing is fly car.
Most of the time it's a fly car
Most of
because
the
there's
time it's-
already an ambulance. They can just jump on the back of that ambulance as long as they have an EMT driver to make the required crew, which is EMT paramedic.
Okay. Let me just-
You're not unique, I'm sorry to say, in Southbury.
Rocky Hill, she said she lives in, I'm just saying. where she
What
lives.
does Rocky Hill use?
Huh?
What does Rocky Hill do?
I told you, Rocky
Yeah.
Hill
I'm sorry.
has volunteer, and then they contract with
Saying
Aetna
it's really
for a
far away.
paramedic.
Okay. For a fly car,
Yeah,
and it works well.
I'm working.
Very
And
good.
I live in Kenton, we actually have a basic ambulance service, fire-based, and our paramedic is shared with 6 other towns.
So, also, my question is, there, obviously, I mean, let's put it out, I mean, we know that, my understanding is Trinity is looking to buy Campion
Camp,
ambulance.
yeah, that's.
And obviously, their
information.
PSAs are not relinquished yet. They haven't come in and say, hey, we're not. an
So
OPM.
when there's a sale or transfer of an EMS service, the entity that's buying the EMS service, those PSA transfer with the sale. The requirement for the person, for the entity buying the respective service has to be that they give 30 days notice to OEMS for the intent to purchase. And they also have to give notice to the towns in which they serve, to the chief elected municipal officer, to say that this transfer is going to occur. In that transfer, the new entity buying the transfer has to uphold the current contract and has to provide at the same level of care that they were providing previously.
Okay, so it's not unusual for these companies to be negotiating and discussing and coming to an agreement and then making the transaction.
Right.
And
And I was just corrected, it's not 30 days, it's 60 days.
we won't hold you to that.
So in a sense, the PSAs are owned, and you can, I mean, they're funny, you can sell them essentially. They have to, with approval,
They're
of
signed.
course, but there is more than just a
Because the
sign.
transaction wouldn't be approved though if they can't.
I mean, what you're
uphold.
saying here is it's being sold.
Yeah.
The
exactly.
service is
So
being
it's
sold,
something
they're
to
buying it,
Let them
and
answer.
it's coming with this PSA.
Company's being
It's
sold.
coming with those
So they
PSAs.
essentially,
It's not independent of the assets and
correct, but
business.
it is yours to, you can
Transfer.
sell, you can transfer with the sale.
Yes.
But essentially, that's potatoes,
still-
potatoes, it's,
Still required to meet the 24/7, 365, and
Right.
if OMS finds that
Right.
it's not,
right,
they will pull the PSA just like they would have normally.
right.
And I think, and I don't know that this, so Letty, has this been ever challenged in your tenure? Because this would be the first sale that I go through. But say a municipality decides, well, we don't want that new entity to own our,
Not in my time.
We have a
Okay.
30 day, we
There
have
was
a
only
30
2
day
sales
out
and
clause.
it was municipal. It was mutually agreed.
okay, so that would be something that would be interesting to find, but I don't know the answer to that, quite honestly. So if a municipality stated, you know, we don't agree with that sale, and, you know, we had a contract with ABC, and now you're going to DEF, and we don't want DEF, do they have
Well,
the?
we currently have a 30 day out clause in
Okay,
our
okay.
contract.
All
And
right.
I'm sure that's negotiable.
The only time I'm aware of it happening is because it was not the PSA was the issue. It was in the term of the contract that said the contract cannot be assigned without the consent of both parties. So
Okay.
while the state said it's fine that the book of business goes, the contract had a clause that said it cannot be assigned without permission.
Yeah,
So
so,
in that case,
yeah, and
there was a dispute, but didn't go to state law. In its arbitration.
Mr. Mansell, can I just add one thing? I know you're trying to wrap up.
Well, we're not, we have more to go, but.
The SAA application specifically said, because I wrote it, that they're not applying for the PSA. They wanted a straight up ALS upgrade. They did not want to involve the PSA.
I understand that.
They didn't want to, I just want to make sure that that's on the.
Yeah, yeah. So we're straight about it. And Southbury was not, this board was not looking to take over the EM service of Southbury Ambulance or Heritage Ambulance. But you're right, you have to clarify that. Was not our intent. So, is there any other questions? Because these are the experts, and I'll be honest, it's hard to get a hold of them. on the phone.
Do you have business cards?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Matt?
Away my last business.
Do you have questions?
I asked for business cards.
Like your
I-
cell phone number,
That,
please?
it's a strange world up there, but it is difficult, and I do know. And thank you for coming out. I think we're good.
We can excuse them. Safe drive back to Rocky Hill.
Thank you.
You may be excused from, I think it was,
The first
I know you don't have so
one
far to
for
go.
commute thing,
You don't have so far to go, but
I have an hour.
safe travel.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you. It's,
Really
you know,
helpful.
I'm sorry that you're finding it difficult to get a hold of us. I think the best way to reach us is through email, and you'll be guaranteed a response. I know phone calls sometimes get, you know, I don't know, messed, dropped. But if you give us an email, we'll be happy to return that.
Thank you so much.
And we are working incredibly hard to make sure we're playing nice in the sandbox with everybody, so.
Yeah, that's
We
the
concur.
analogy.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, we're doing pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah, well, it only feels like it's 10:25.
Well, it
It's
feels
really
like it's
9:25.
It does feel like,
Can we invite you on?
we've had short. But anyway, okay. So, Southbury Ambulance is here. Heritage
yeah.
Ambulance is here. Would you like to hear from them?
If they have things to add, and if anyone has anything to ask, of course, they've been sitting here patiently.
Good grief.
I don't know if I have any more questions really at this point.
Are you,
Well, let's
what's that?
see if, I mean, they've been sitting here for 2 hours.
Well, they've been sitting here, everybody's welcome to sit. It's a question of,
Yeah, if they have anything to add.
I think it's more a question if the board has questions of Geraldine.
Well, I mean, my initial question would just be whether Geraldine has anything to add based
I
on
agree.
everything she's heard over the last 2.5 hours.
Yes, and same thing for George.
What about the dispatch protocols?
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I'm asking. Put your cup there. You won't touch. We're not-
So, go
Don't-
ahead, Jason, ask your question.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, but I'm just,
Yes, louder.
there you go. Yeah, she's been eating them by the hundred. But we don't want to touch her cup. Okay, so
I'm asking
Jason, go
George to
ahead.
come up too.
Little break there, a little.
I'm bringing them up to, is it okay, you want both of them up there, right?
Are you okay with running the meeting? Excuse me. Would you like to have George come up?
I thought we did. I thought we had
No, no, I
invited both of
understand.
them up.
And I'm doing this so we make
Yeah.
sure we're.
Yeah, I thought you were inviting both of
So
them up.
let's
George wasn't
ask
sure.
Geraldine, Geraldine's here, you've asked her to come up and ask some questions. Jason, would you go ahead with your question?
Before I ask my initial question, one of the topics that did come up during the discussion was the patient quality care audits, and we were going to ask you what you guys do and whether there's been follow-up on that recommendation from the Holdsworth
Southbury
report.
Ambulance has an internal procedure for patient care reports. We have also used Gerard and Gerard over the years, who was in that, in the plan. And we utilize St. Mary's Medical Control as needed.
Can I ask how are we able to see those quality reports?
I guess
I'm sorry?
define what you want to see, and as long as it doesn't break any HIPAA rules.
Okay, I'm just wondering, we have quality, we have these
I
reports.
mean,
I'm
your
just-
data you can get right from dispatch. Probably what you're looking for. Ray Mather can set it up so that you get a report of whatever you're looking for right off of right from 911. I get a daily dispatch report of my calls.
We can get the
Southbury
dispatch reports of quality, but
Right.
we're not really that's time of dispatch, time of arrival.
That's part of your quality.
Right. That's only part of it. I think is that what some of the concern here is, Jason? Are you just worried about time? Are you asking about the?
No, I'm simply following up on a recommendation in the Holdsworth report. I don't have a concern about quality.
patient care
There's a
quality.
discussion in the Holdsworth 2013 report on a few recommendations, and we brought up, I think throughout the course of the night, we brought up each of them and asked whether there's follow-up and whatnot, and this was one of them, and we said we'd ask Geraldine, the recommendation is that the town should initiate a relationship with third-party vendor that conduct retrospective patient care quality audits of a minimum of 25% of BLS EMS patient care interventions on a yearly basis. And then it goes on, and then it recommends Gerard and Associates. That was simply my question, though, whether there's been follow-up on that recommendation and what we've done and what you guys do in that regard. That's all.
So we don't currently do that, right?
We do. Southbury Ambulance, 100% QAs every patient care report.
Okay.
And then we do periodically send a percentage of reports to Gerard and Gerard.
Okay. And then we could get their, I think, I don't know, maybe I'm not, don't mean to put words in Jason's mouth, but what I'm looking, what Jason's concerned, what I'm getting at, I think what he's concerned with is the quality of care. I mean, we talk about that, and I think that's, for the board, and I'm not questioning whether you are or not, but we do need to, certainly you've never heard me complain, and you said that, but I'm looking to, like, is there a report we could get that says, from them, that says everything is working well and it's going according to, that's what
Sure,
I
I can
think.
send you a letter tomorrow saying just that.
Well, that's from you, but.
But, I mean.
I'm saying the third party.
Well, the third party, Gerard and Gerard, is quite expensive, and that's why we limit that to the number of times a year we do. You pay per patient care report.
Mr. Manville, if I could, the way the QA loop is set up in all of healthcare, especially here in our state, is Geraldine sets up the report to Gerard. They're de-identified, so there's no patient demographics. The Gerard people look at those against the protocols from St. Mary's Hospital, and they say, how many IVs did we make, how many this, how many this, how many that. And then they're obligated to report back anomalies to St. Mary's Hospital. So if you were looking for an overall view of the quality of the services delivered by the personnel at Southbury or HVAA or STS, your first stop would be to Paul Yeno at St. Mary's Hospital and say, hey, we're the town, we don't have a direct concern, but what's your overall feeling? And he wouldn't be able to give you patient specifics, but he could say, hey, we've had 3 quality care issues in the last 12 months, or 12, or none, and that's at least a start. Geraldine's prohibited by HIPAA from giving you any drill down information that could give a reasonable person an opportunity, as you're aware, sir, under the federal laws, to go back and say, hey, they came to my house because I had chest pain or gallstones or whatever. So there is that initial loop. Geraldine is limited in what she would be able to give you back in aggregate, but it's a simple call to Mr. Yano to say, hey, you're the medical control for our ambulance services. What's your overall sense of quality? And he can tell you.
And I'm not questioning, I think it's just important to know that we.
Right.
Yeah, and just to clarify something Jeff said, I have not raised any concern over patient quality. What we've done here tonight is we've extensive discussion on a lot of these reports. So I saw it as an opportunity for us to follow up on some of these recommendations that have been made. And a number of recommendations are made in the report, and this was one of them. And that's the genesis of my question, not any personal concern I have, but there's a recommendation here that, hey, this is a good thing to do, and this is how you should do it, and you know, and the town should do this. So that's the purpose of the question. And then, you know, since Len wrote the report, I mean, perhaps you can just describe what you envisioned as the town initiating this process, or whether what's happening now is, you know,
Well, the process that's
compliant
happening
with
now when I wrote the report was because the town asked what additional safety concerns or overlay protective measures could they put in there. And within a short order, I can't remember, but within less than a few months when this was brought up to Geraldine, her group passed the resolution and went to Gerard and said, hey, we want to do this, so there's this independent body looking at our work so that we're just not looking at our own stuff. And as she just reported to you, they're looking internally at each other. There's lots of senior folks that have been in the service for a long time, and they know the quality. Are you taking the right vitals? Are you doing the right? Any large anomaly is going to go right to medical control anyway. So they work under the authority of Dr. Jacoby and the folks at St. Mary's Hospital.
Okay, I think again, one of the board's concerns with seeing the report is that we have a responsibility to the public to make sure, and I'm not questioning that the ambulance services are not providing that. We just need, where do we go? How do we know? We don't want to find out later on that we should have been looking and there's a problem. We should, as a municipality, know, and that's fine.
So yes, they took that recommendation.
Well, that's good. Well, I mean, this Holsworth report was shelved, and we're looking to find out.
I mean, that's, that's one of the things here, is way back when, the town never accepted this, right? So there's all these recommendations hanging out there, what has happened with some of them.
But I want to just say something, like Bob said it initially, it's not that it wasn't accepted, it was in draft form, so how do we know it wasn't accepted? Do we know that it was rejected?
Yeah,
Because
there
if
was
it
an
wasn't
email.
rejected,
There's
it
like-
wasn't-
There's an email on it that,
Okay, did we do?
It wasn't accepted.
It wasn't accepted, okay.
And I think we heard tonight, I mean, we were part of that,
Right,
and we're
no,
trying to
it's-
figure out really what's going on and what we need to do. Any other questions of?
I'm just, we've been here a long time, having a lot of discussions over these
Well,
topics.
this
and
is
we've
a
spoke-
big-
No, it's good, and we've spoken to Geraldine a lot in the past. I mean, I just ask if you had anything to add to the discussion that we've been having, any information you'd like to provide to us that you think would be helpful. I think it would make sense to give Geraldine that opportunity.
Okay, so I made some notes that you're deferring to me later. One is the uniform dispatch. All the services met with, at the time, was Corporal Hughes, now Corporal Grillo. And we've streamlined the dispatch protocols as much as we can with the three services in one. As there are issues, Chris brings it up and the group discusses it and we move forward to a happy solution. EMD, was tweaked and improved in this past year. In the past 6 months was lots of discussion over the EMD, hot and cold response. That's been all resolved. So we've managed to overcome some difficult communications amongst us as people, and I think now we're collaboratively as a group with Chris Grillo. The services do not receive, Southbury Ambulance does not receive PAR, okay? They do receive, the volunteer members of the organization receive the Volunteer Appreciation Program. The PAR is a fire department thing. Volunteer Appreciation Program goes to the volunteers. It does not go to the organization. The check is written to the organization each year. Southbury Ambulance is a pass-through, which I've asked for that to be changed forever. So the town is the one that's appreciating the volunteers. It should go from the town to the volunteer. That's not a discussion for here. It's just a clarification. There was talk in there about negotiations with Campions. The Holsworth group did do extensive negotiations with Campions, and I think it was like a 7 or 9 year extended contract that we got with minimal increase. That was one of the things. So going forward, I mean, that shows that Campions has been amicable through all this and supportive of the town, as has been mentioned. 30 years they've been providing this medic intercept, and it's not in anybody's best interest not to sit down and have a conversation. I think I answered all the questions of the notes that I made while I was sitting back there.
Are any other questions? Do you have questions? I have.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Sorry, Dan Cullen, Director of Finance. And I've been reading in the paper, just for my clarification, that each ambulance costs $1 million to on the road or to buy, and that may not be a figure that is accurate.
You've been reading in the paper that each ambulance costs $1 million. To buy an ambulance?
Yeah, to buy it, outfit it.
For a BLS startup?
Yeah.
it's probably an accurate number,
Okay.
about $1 million a startup.
Just for my clarification, I looked at the 990 that you sent me,
Yes,
and the equipment on the 990 is 873,000. So if we have 4 ambulances, it would be about $4 million. We're just trying to figure out where the difference would be in that number.
well, we're an established organization for 65 years.
Yep.
So this is not a one-time, tomorrow we're gonna go buy everything we need to start up an ambulance.
Yep. No,
We've been
I
building this for 65 years.
get that, but
Okay.
if you look at the 990, it starts at, you bought the asset and then depreciates over time. So the starting asset is $873,000.
Okay,
So I'm just trying to figure out where the difference of $4 million that is in the paper, and I could be missing something here, maybe I'm just trying to clarify.
well, I think you're talking turkeys and cats.
Okay.
I mean, it's not the same thing. So you're talking about my 990
Yep.
and my assets, which, you buy an ambulance, you outfit it, you bring in the people, we have a facility.
Okay,
So that's what's encompassed in my 990,
got it.
everything that I have over there. Now, if you're gonna go out and you're gonna buy 4 ambulances tomorrow, and you're gonna equip each one of them, I'm sure you already priced it out here. I mean, I don't have those exact numbers, but it's, to start one BLS ambulance startup, right? And I believe it's in a template form here, but like $1 million. It's in one of these reports. And that was a 2013 number.
Mr. Holsworth?
Yeah, I think the point of and I have not seen the paper, so I'm not sure where the numbers are coming from either. If we're talking about vehicle and equipment, that's one thing. If we're talking about starting up an ambulance, you're talking about salary benefits, illegal.
Yeah, I'm just thinking vehicle.
Vehicle and equipment, depending upon which of the 3 types of vehicles you buy, anywhere from 110 on the low side to 250 on the high side. Cardiac, just the truck. Stretcher system, another 30, cardiac monitor, another 40.
I think that's where the confusion.
Yeah,
I think the discussion is to start up an ambulance, which includes, isn't just
Start
the
finishing staff.
payroll and staff and benefits and what have you, not the vehicle itself. Vehicle itself, something equivalent to what I know what Geraldine paid for her last one, but if you made that an ALS truck, you're immediately putting $40,000 to $50,000 worth of equipment on it, in addition to what's already there. Thanks.
Gerald, in your application, it indicates an MOU with Camping Ambulance for your 24-hour coverage. Is this utilization of the existing town paramedic contract, or is this an additional contract with Camping Ambulance?
The state asked for, how are we gonna supplement this, or I don't remember what their exact word is in the application.
They asked who the mutual aid was gonna be, and so when we wrote that in there, it was the intent that the Campion contract would stay intact. Geraldine's service would get up and start initially, as we discussed over the last few hours. They would both complement each other.
But you have an you have an MOU.
No, it's not an MOU, it's just a letter of understanding that the state required.
A letter
that
is a memo of
Campion-
understanding.
Campion's required, Geraldine was required to say who would be her mutual aid,
The state required me to get that.
mutual aid agreement.
Okay, so I could be wrong. When the call comes in for an ALS call, under this model you're suggesting, and the call comes in for the ALS call, are we gonna dispatch Southbury ambulance during the time they have the paramedic in town? Or are we dispatching both the Campion fly car and, or just, we have the Campion fly car who's or are they just gonna be running a backup? Or are they both being dispatched?
You're gonna, if there are set hours.
Is that the idea?
If we have a paramedic, Southbury Ambulance is gonna respond to the call.
So when the so the dispatch protocol is gonna say, okay, whatever the hours, let's say 9 till 5 or 6 till 6.
Right.
When the advanced life support call comes in, and it's needed, it's going to not be dispatched to Campion. There will be ALS for Southbury ambulance, and there will not be a secondary call for the fly car to come. Is that?
That's the intent.
That's the intent. I think needed to know that. And will you be covering on the advanced life support the rest of the town?
If we're called,
So, I mean, if they dispatch an ALS call, came in, let's say to Heritage Ambulance, ALS call came in, and you could respond to that ALS call. I mean, is that?
we could, but that's where it gets sticky, because then my medic has to get in Heritage's vehicle, then there would have to be, Heritage doesn't want to lose out on their transport, because, I mean, that's what keeps the doors.
But it would be more,
going.
it sounds like it'd be more efficient.
Well, it could be,
I mean, I
but then one person from the Heritage ambulance will have to stay behind, and now you have two ambulances out of service. Because Southbury's only gonna have, we're not gonna have that.
but your
many.
ALS ambulance could take that person and make the call.
We could, but then we would deprive Heritage Village from that transport, which jeopardizes their stability, as Director Kohler was talking about before.
So what I think I'm trying to figure out is, from a model side, efficiencies is what, in Holsworth is it more efficient? I know we're concerned about all the ambulance, the different services, but which is, that's my question, which is more efficient with an ambulance there? Go ahead, Mike.
So Geraldine, I'll ask the direct question, one of the recommendations in that I think in the 2013 report was a consolidation of services between SAA and HVAA. Now that report was, the findings of that report and the recommendation of that report were rejected. But have there ever been discussions about just that?
Yes.
And is that something that you continue to have discussions on, whether it be a true and full merger of operations, or whether it simply be, and in Connecticut we're all talking about it, a consolidation of shared services to make things more efficient and effective? Is that something you'd consider, especially as you're looking at this expansion? It's an expansion of services that SAA is looking to offer.
So about a week ago, we talked about this?
So I think we can invite George up.
Yeah,
at this point.
if you'd like to. So.
I apologize for it, but my goal here is to keep this moving quickly and everybody gets.
I know, I think that's true, because I think that was a recommendation
George,
in the
could you come up,
report.
please,
And it's a part of the recommendation that, to me, in a business sense, just makes sense, and from a service sense, could potentially make sense. So I'm curious to, whatever you guys are comfortable sharing at that point about that concept.
It's something we talk about off and on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one thing that you cannot rule without is the fact that the reimbursements that come, basically a whopping percentage of everything we do is Medicare funded.
Right.
It really is. The numbers are all out there. So Medicare funding is chronically 20% less than what it costs to provide the service. So that gap has to come from somewhere, and so we have our respective support structures. We do an annual appeal, we do walkathons, we do, and we cooperate all the time. I forget the exact number. I think we did 300 calls into Southbury, mutual aid. That's what mutual aid is. It's a form, essentially, of combining the services. And it's traditional throughout Connecticut as well. And Southbury comes in to the village, a similar amount of time. So there's a lot of cooperative and ongoing talks about the possibilities of more, absolutely, because we have to do what makes sense, dollars and cents wise. Otherwise, we're out of business.
Because I believe this is right, you know, because I work in the nonprofit space, that in theory, the general structures could remain, but the 501c3 of Southbury Ambulance Association, Southbury Ambulance Association could essentially become the fiscal sponsor of Heritage Village Ambulance Association. The entity of HVAA could still exist in terms of a well-known, trusted entity within the village, because people trust that. They see the truck rolling, they feel safe and secure and all of that, and they feel local. So I'm wondering if in terms of a consolidation of service offerings and in cost efficiencies more than anything else, that if that's something that is worth exploring, that essentially HVA would continue to exist as an organization, but it would essentially live under the SAA 501c3, which is considered a fiscal sponsorship. And there could be cost savings there, I think. Nonprofits are doing that all the time because it's such a difficult time for the nonprofit sector in general. So they're consolidating in many ways. So.
And I think, like I said, you know, and that's my question, is when, you know, we're going to still have a camping ambulance who's providing ALS coverage to what we have as the training school and to the Heritage for primary. Is there an efficiency in having it so that they're covering primary cover of the ALS is a training school and Heritage Village? And I mean, the thing is, once they go and they take the patient, they make the call. I'm not, you know, I know we're talking about patient care and we're talking about caring for our services, and you know, that's.
Well, can you do that? And that's what I'm saying is, you know, if there's a way to, I think number one, first and foremost, is maintain the level or improve the level. I think that's Geraldine's goal all along: improve the patient care that we can give to the community. But if you can do that while becoming more cost effective, you know, even though you're a nonprofit, doesn't mean that you don't want to make a profit or a minimum. You know, the goal is to get to zero every year. That's what it is to you know, have that. But what I'm suggesting is that a lot of the back office administrative areas of running a nonprofit can be consolidated under one 501c3 designation, but the service offering that's delivered to the public wouldn't really feel any different, and the quality of service would be the same, and the trucks rolling would still have the HVA logo, and all the things that do matter in terms of public safety, and also the feeling of security, not only the actual security, but the feeling of security. So I think it's worth exploring the idea of consolidating.
The quality of service could increase because of the efficiency, the quality of service. And I'm not saying they're not giving good quality service.
There could be more funding to put towards things.
That's certainly not said here, but.
I feel like we're getting into the minutia of their operations at this point.
Nope.
And I think right now we have been given a lot, and I know I don't feel well, but we've been given a lot of information to digest. And I think if we have questions beyond those questions, we should engage them back again, because we're not going to come to any conclusions tonight, as far as I can see, unless we're voting on approving their SAA's application.
I don't think we can do that tonight.
No.
Right.
That's
Thank you.
It's, okay.
It should probably be on our next.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you still had questions.
Next week. We meet every week.
What's that? Well, this board has done a lot of work also, so let's, to our credit on that. Okay, and we have digested an awful lot, and I do appreciate you coming in and the state for, I'm sure we'll have more questions as we digest what we've seen here, and I think it's only prudent that we do have some more discussions on this. Questions raised about what if you were to cover the entire town with your ALS upgrade during that time period for the entire town? Then we would have a backup paramedic fly car, and I think we need to take a look at a lot of that before we move forward. So Any other questions right now?
I would just say that we still have to address the makeup of the EMS committee. I know Bob Holdsworth touched on the fact that it's a youth group. It's something that we've talked about before, and we should maybe have it on the next next week's agenda for some,
Well, we
action.
should,
We've got a plan that's gotta get in, right? And they've already given us a draft. You guys have prepared a draft plan.
so they have drafted a plan. Just so you know, they've drafted a plan. We've had it. And that EMS plan is under review by the deputy fire marshal, and to work it into the state has a toolkit. Okay, so it's got to go into that toolkit. And once that's there, they're going to give that, take a look at it with the ambulance companies, EMS, and take a look at it. And the only few things that you have to, I guess you have to agree to is, in that plan is what's the response time. What's realistically, what's the response time? And it varies from community to community because we are more rural. So we should have that pretty much ready. It's been worked on with the draft. The draft was sent. And
we should begin the conversations about it. And it's not just about the whole plan. We have all had a conversation that it appears that it doesn't comply with our charter. The structure, and let's talk about it. We'll just
I like hearing user group though.
Yeah.
I think that gave me a new perspective on it personally.
Well, that's, yeah. Okay, is there anything else?
I'll make a motion to adjourn with gratitude to everyone who provided so much.
One last, second.
Right, and then we can conversate.
Made and seconded.
We could have
The motion's on the floor for discussion.
I have 7 points.
Could we also put on the agenda to talk, to perhaps make a decision on the application? So I would like for us, I don't know what the necessary steps are if we're not even at that point, but I'm just saying that.
Should at least be on the agenda.
It could be on the agenda, and doesn't mean we have to work on that, but I think we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, made, second discussion, any other discussion? I'll call the vote, all in favor, aye, opposed, and it carries.
Thank you, everybody.
Gene?